Dear friends, welcome to Mysterious Sleep Stories, a sanctuary of captivating tales hidden in the shadows between our world and the other, on the evening of a tiring and stressful day. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your bed, let us take you to the heart of Chicago, to a magnificent hotel where the past refuses to find peace, where a particular room has remained a riddle for over a century. This is not a horror story designed to suddenly awaken you, but rather a journey of in-depth exploration into one of America's most enduringly haunted places, told with a calming rhythm designed to gently guide you into dreams. So adjust your pillows, let the outside world fade away, and join us as we step through the ornate doors of the Congress Plaza Hotel and ascend to the 11th floor, where room 441 patiently and forever awaits, never truly empty, never truly lonely. To understand the mystery of room 441, we must first understand the magnificent structure that houses it. The Congress Plaza Hotel stands as a testament to an era of unparalleled ambition and architectural grandeur, rising from Chicago's South Loop district like a palace from another time. Its story begins in the late 19th century, during a period when Chicago was transforming itself from a frontier town into one of America's great metropolitan centers. The hotel's origins trace back to 1893, the same year Chicago hosted the world's Columbian Exposition, an event that would reshape the city's identity forever. The exposition brought 27 million visitors to Chicago, a staggering number for the time, and the city needed accommodations befitting such a momentous occasion. The Congress Hotel, as it was originally known, was conceived during this period of explosive growth and limitless optimism. The original building, designed by Clinton J. Warren, opened its doors in 1893 as the Auditorium Annex. The structure embodied the architectural philosophy of the Chicago School, featuring a steel frame construction that was revolutionary for its time. This wasn't just a building. It was a statement of Chicago's arrival as a world-class city. The hotel's facade combined elements of Romanesque revival with the emerging modern aesthetic that would come to define Chicago architecture. Standing before the Congress Plaza Hotel today, you're immediately struck by its imposing presence. The building stretches along Michigan Avenue, its limestone and brick exterior weathered but dignified, like an elderly statesman who has witnessed generations of history unfold. The structure rises 12 stories, though some sections extend to 14, creating an irregular roofline that adds to its distinctive character. Ornate cornices crown the building, their decorative details speaking to an age when craftsmanship and beauty were inseparable from function. The hotel's location is no accident. It sits directly across from Grant Park, Chicago's front yard, with sweeping views of Lake Michigan just beyond. In the hotel's early years, guests could watch ships moving across the lake's vast expanse, their sails catching the wind like white wings against the blue water. The park itself was still being developed, transforming from a rail yard into the green space that would become one of Chicago's defining features. Inside, the original hotel was a marvel of modern luxury. The lobby featured soaring ceilings supported by marble columns, each one carefully selected and transported from quarries across the country. The floor was laid with intricate mosaic tiles, forming geometric patterns that drew the eye across the expansive space. Crystal chandeliers, imported from Europe, cast a warm, welcoming light that glinted off the polished brass fixtures and gleaming woodwork. The Congress was designed to accommodate the wealthy and influential. Its guest rooms, numbering over 800 across the sprawling complex, were appointed with the finest furnishings available. Each room featured running water, a luxury that many American homes still lacked. The hotel installed one of the city's first electric lighting systems, a technological marvel that allowed guests to illuminate their rooms with the flip of a switch rather than fumbling with gas lamps or candles. But the Congress Plaza Hotel story is one of constant evolution. In 1902, a major addition designed by Halliburton and Roche doubled the hotel's size. This expansion created the South Tower, adding hundreds of additional rooms and transforming the property into one of Chicago's largest hotels. The architects maintained the original building's aesthetic while incorporating new technologies and amenities. Passenger elevators, still a relatively novel invention, were installed to transport guests smoothly between floors. The South Addition brought with it new public spaces that would become legendary in Chicago society. The Gold Room, an opulent ballroom decorated in gilt and mirrors, hosted countless weddings, debutante balls, and society gatherings. The Pompeian Room, designed to evoke the grandeur of ancient Rome, featured hand-painted murals depicting scenes from classical mythology. These spaces weren't merely functional. They were works of art, designed to transport guests to a world of elegance and refinement. In 1907, another expansion added the North Tower, further increasing the hotel's capacity and prestige. Each addition was carefully integrated into the existing structure, creating a complex that felt unified despite being built in stages over nearly 2 decades. The architects employed consistent materials and maintained the overall design vocabulary, ensuring that the Congress Plaza Hotel presented a cohesive face to Michigan Avenue. During the early 20th century, the Congress Plaza Hotel stood at the center of Chicago's cultural life. The hotel's proximity to the Loop made it a natural gathering place for business leaders, politicians, artists, and celebrities. The grand ballrooms hosted everything from political rallies to performances by world-renowned musicians. Presidents stayed here during visits to Chicago. International dignitaries made it their headquarters while conducting business in the city. The hotel also served as a more permanent residence for some of Chicago's elite. In an era before modern apartment buildings became common, wealthy individuals and families would maintain suites at prestigious hotels, living there for months or even years at a time. The Congress Plaza Hotel's long-term residents included artists, writers, business magnates, and society figures who found the hotel's combination of luxury, service, and location irresistible. The architecture of the Congress Plaza Hotel reflects the optimism and confidence of turn-of-the-century America. Every detail was considered, from the carved stone details on the exterior to the hand-painted ceilings in the public rooms. The building materials themselves tell a story of a connected world. Limestone from Indiana, marble from Italy, wood from the Pacific Northwest, fixtures from Eastern factories. The hotel was a microcosm of American industrial might and global trade. As you walk through the hotel's corridors today, you can still sense the grandeur of its origins. The wide hallways, designed to accommodate the full skirts and elaborate dress of the Gilded Age, stretch long and straight, their walls still bearing some of the original moldings and details. The ceilings are high, generous, allowing air to circulate naturally in the days before air conditioning. The windows are tall and numerous, designed to maximize natural light and ventilation. The hotel's 11th floor, where room 441 resides, was part of the original 1893 structure. This floor maintained the same high standards as the rest of the hotel, with well-appointed rooms designed for comfort and elegance. The rooms on this floor were popular among long-term guests, being high enough to avoid street noise, but not so high as to be inconvenient in an era when elevator reliability was still being perfected. Throughout the 1920s, the Congress Plaza Hotel continued to thrive, even as Prohibition transformed Chicago's social landscape. The hotel's restaurants and bars officially served no alcohol, but like many establishments of the era, it adapted to the new reality in ways both legal and otherwise. The Congress became known for its excellent dining, its continental room serving cuisine that rivaled the finest restaurants in New York or San Francisco. The Great Depression brought challenges to the hotel industry, as it did to every sector of American life. The Congress Plaza Hotel weathered this storm through a combination of careful management and its established reputation. While some hotels closed their doors permanently, the Congress adapted, offering reduced rates while maintaining its standards of service. The hotel became something of a refuge during these difficult years, a place where Chicago's elite could maintain the illusion of normalcy amid economic catastrophe. During World War II, the Congress Plaza Hotel took on new roles. The military utilized the hotel for officer accommodations and administrative functions. The ballrooms that had once hosted glittering society events now served as meeting spaces for war planning and coordination. The hotel's proximity to Chicago's rail hubs made it a convenient location for military personnel passing through the city. These wartime years brought a different energy to the building, a sense of purpose and urgency that replaced the leisurely elegance of peacetime. The post-war years saw the Congress Plaza Hotel continue its evolution. The 1950s brought modernization efforts, including updated mechanical systems and renovated public spaces. Some of the original Victorian and Edwardian details were removed or covered during this period, as mid-century aesthetics favored cleaner lines and simpler designs. Air conditioning was installed throughout the building, and the old gas lighting fixtures were finally removed entirely. The 1960s and 1970s brought new challenges as Chicago's downtown area experienced decline. Many of the grand hotels of Michigan Avenue's golden age closed or were converted to other uses. The Congress Plaza Hotel persevered, though not without difficulties. The building showed its age, and the hotel struggled to compete with newer, more modern properties. Yet the Congress retained its charm for those who appreciated historic architecture and the weight of history. During these decades, something else was happening at the Congress Plaza Hotel, something that would eventually define its modern identity. Guests and staff began reporting unusual occurrences. Unexplained sounds echoed through hallways. Doors opened and closed on their own. The elevators seemed to have minds of their own, stopping at floors where no one had pushed the call button. And certain rooms, particularly on the higher floors, developed reputations among the staff as places where strange things happened with unsettling regularity. The hotel's architecture itself seemed to contribute to these phenomena. The Congress Plaza Hotel is a maze of corridors, dead ends, and architectural curiosities created by its piecemeal construction. Hallways that should be parallel aren't quite. Rooms that should be identical have subtle differences. The building settled unevenly over the decades, creating slight slopes in floors and gaps around door frames. These architectural peculiarities, combined with the building's age and history, created an atmosphere ripe for mystery. In 1985, the hotel underwent significant renovations, attempting to restore some of its original grandeur while updating for modern guests. Original chandeliers were cleaned and rehung. Hidden architectural details were uncovered and restored. The Gold Room and other public spaces received careful attention, bringing back some of the luster that had been lost to decades of modifications. Yet even these renovations couldn't erase the strange reputation that certain parts of the hotel had developed. The Congress Plaza Hotel today occupies a unique position in Chicago's landscape. It is neither a museum piece preserved in amber nor a completely modernized property. Instead, it exists in a middle ground, honoring its past while serving contemporary guests. The building remains one of Chicago's largest hotels, with over 800 rooms spread across its interconnected structures. It serves tourists, business travelers, and convention attendees, many of whom have no idea of the building's haunted reputation when they check in. Walking the corridors of the Congress Plaza Hotel at night, when the sounds of the city have faded and the hallways are quiet, you can almost hear the echoes of all those who have passed through these spaces. The footsteps of Gilded Age industrialists, the laughter of jazz age flappers, the hurried movements of wartime officers, the slow shuffle of elderly long-term residents who made the hotel their home. Over 130 years of human experience has soaked into these walls, layer upon layer of joy and sorrow, hope and despair, life and death. The building itself has witnessed Chicago's transformation from a city rebuilding after the Great Fire to a modern metropolis. It has stood through economic boom and bust, war and peace, cultural revolution, and social upheaval. The Congress Plaza Hotel is more than a building. It is a monument to time itself, a physical embodiment of memory and history. And nowhere in this vast, storied structure is that sense of accumulated history more palpable than on the 11th floor, in a room that bears the number 441. Room 441, the legend begins. Room 441 sits on the 11th floor of the Congress Plaza Hotel's South Tower, the section added in the 1902 expansion. To reach it, you would take one of the hotel's ornate elevators, their brass fixtures polished by countless hands over more than a century. The elevator doors would open onto a hallway that stretches in both directions, its carpet muffling your footsteps as you make your way toward the room that has become the hotel's most infamous address. The hallway itself is unremarkable at first glance. Sconces line the walls, casting pools of warm light every few feet. The wallpaper, though updated many times over the decades, maintains a traditional pattern befitting the building's historic character. Numbered doors appear at regular intervals, each identical to the next, brass numbers gleaming against dark wood. Yet as you approach room 441, some visitors report a subtle change in atmosphere, a heaviness in the air that's difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. The door to room 441 looks like any other in the hotel. Standard width, standard height, painted the same color as its neighbors. A peephole sits at eye level, allowing occupants to see who might be knocking. The brass number plate reads simply 441. Nothing dramatic, nothing suggesting that this particular room holds mysteries that have puzzled guests and staff for generations. Yet this door, this ordinary-looking portal, opens onto one of the most persistently haunted locations in American hotel history. The room itself, when you step inside, is surprisingly normal. Or at least, it appears normal at first. The layout follows the standard design of the hotel's guest rooms from the early 1900s. A moderate-sized space, perhaps 15 feet by 20, with high ceilings characteristic of the era. A window looks out over Michigan Avenue or toward the building's interior courtyard, depending on the room's exact position within the structure. The furnishings have been updated numerous times over the years, but the room's essential character remains unchanged. According to hotel records and staff accounts dating back decades, room 441 has always been different. Not visibly, not in any way you could point to and say, there, that's wrong, but different nonetheless. The room carries an atmosphere, a presence, that has been noted by countless guests over the years, many of whom had no knowledge of the room's reputation when they checked in. The legend of room 441 centers on a figure known as Peg Leg Johnny, though like many ghost stories, the details shift and change depending on who's telling the tale. The most consistent version of the story identifies Johnny as a homeless man who worked odd jobs around the Congress Plaza Hotel in the early 20th century. Some accounts place this in the 1910s, others in the 1920s, but the core narrative remains similar across retellings. Johnny, according to these accounts, was a fixture around the hotel despite not being officially employed there. He had lost his leg in an accident, the details of which vary wildly from telling to telling. Some say it was a railroad accident, others a streetcar collision, still others claim it was lost in a bar fight or industrial accident. Regardless of how he lost it, Johnny walked with a distinctive gait, aided by a wooden prosthetic leg that earned him his nickname. The sound of his approach was unmistakable, a normal footfall followed by the hollow knock of wood against floor. Step thump, step thump, step thump, a rhythm that those who knew him could identify from down the hall. Johnny's relationship with the hotel was complex. He wasn't staff, but he wasn't exactly a vagrant either. He existed in that liminal space between insider and outsider, performing small tasks for tips, running errands, carrying bags, delivering messages. The official employees tolerated him because he made himself useful, and because in the freewheeling days of the early 20th century, such arrangements were more common than they would later become. Johnny knew the hotel's rhythms, its secret passages, its quirks and personalities. The tragedy occurred, as the story goes, in room 441. The exact date is lost to time, buried in records that may no longer exist or are never properly kept. Johnny had been drinking. This much seems consistent across versions of the tale. Whether he was alone or with companions varies, depending on who's recounting the story. What's generally agreed upon is that at some point during the night, Johnny died in room 441. Some versions of the legend claim Johnny was murdered, killed over a gambling debt, or in a robbery gone wrong. Others suggest he simply drank himself to death. His body found days later when staff finally entered the room, responding to complaints about the smell. Still other accounts propose that Johnny died by suicide, despondent over his circumstances and the hard life he'd lived. The lack of definitive records allows each version to coexist, the truth buried beneath layers of speculation and elaboration. What happened to Johnny's body after death is another point of variation in the legend. Some say he was buried in a pauper's grave, his final resting place unmarked and forgotten. Others claim his body was never properly identified, buried under a different name, or possibly disposed of in the shadowy ways that occasionally happened in that era when an inconvenient death needed to be quietly managed. A few versions suggest Johnny's body was never found at all, that it somehow disappeared from the room, though this seems the least likely scenario. Regardless of the specific details of his death, Johnny apparently never left room 441. Or more accurately, he never left the Congress Plaza Hotel, though he seems most strongly attached to the room where he died. The first reports of strange occurrences in and around room 441 are difficult to pin down chronologically. Ghost stories rarely come with dates attached, and the hotel's management over the years has been understandably reluctant to publicize accounts of supernatural activity. What we do know is that by the mid-20th century, room 441 had developed a reputation among hotel staff. Housekeepers reported strange sounds emanating from the room, even when it was supposedly empty. The distinctive step thump that had been Johnny's signature in life was heard echoing through the hallways, particularly late at night when the floor was quiet. Maids entering the room to clean would find it in disarray, despite no guest having checked in, or alternatively, would find it mysteriously tidied when they'd left it messy the night before. Guests who stayed in room 441 began reporting unusual experiences with increasing frequency. Some described waking in the night to the sound of someone walking around the room, that distinctive, uneven gait suggesting someone with a prosthetic leg. Others reported their belongings being moved or rearranged while they were out, items appearing in different positions than where they'd been left. A few claimed to have seen a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room or sitting in the chair by the window. The experiences weren't uniformly frightening. Unlike the violent, aggressive hauntings depicted in movies, the phenomena associated with room 441 was often more subtle, more sad than scary. Guests reported feeling a presence in the room, but not necessarily a threatening one. It was as if someone else was there, sharing the space, go about their business alongside the living occupant. Some guests found this unsettling enough to request a room change. Others were intrigued, even comforted by the sense of not being alone. Temperature fluctuations became another commonly reported phenomenon in room 441. Guests would describe sudden cold spots, areas of the room where the temperature would drop dramatically for no apparent reason. These cold spots would appear and disappear without pattern, sometimes lasting seconds, sometimes lingering for minutes. They couldn't be explained by drafts or air conditioning issues, appearing even in summer when the hotel's cooling system was working perfectly throughout the rest of the building. Electronic devices seemed particularly affected in room 441. Long before the modern era of smartphones and laptops, guests reported that radios would turn on and off by themselves, or would switch stations without anyone touching the dial. As televisions became standard in hotel rooms, room 441's TV developed a reputation for behaving strangely, changing channels, adjusting volume, or simply turning on in the middle of the night. In the modern era, guests report that their phones drain battery inexplicably quickly in the room, or that they have difficulty getting a signal even when the rest of the floor has perfect reception. The bathroom in room 441 has its own subset of strange occurrences. Multiple guests over the years have reported hearing the shower running when no one was using it, or finding the bathroom filled with steam when they returned to the room, despite having left it hours earlier with no one inside. The toilet has been known to flush on its own, the sound clear and unmistakable, occurring even when no guest is in the room and the door is locked from inside. One of the most frequently reported phenomena involves the bed. Guests describe lying down to sleep and feeling the mattress depress beside them, as if someone had sat down on the edge of the bed. Some report an even more unsettling sensation, feeling someone lie down next to them, the shift in a mattress and the rustle of covers suggesting another presence joining them in bed. These accounts rarely describe seeing anything, just the tactile sensation of sharing the bed with an invisible companion. The room's door has been the source of countless strange reports. Guests describe hearing knocking at all hours, particularly late at night or in the early morning hours. When they check the peephole or open the door, no one is there. The hallway is empty, silent, with no sign that anyone had been knocking moments before. Some guests report that the knocking has a distinctive pattern: 3 quick raps followed by a pause, then 2 more, though the significance of this pattern, if any, remains unclear. Objects in the room seem to have a tendency to go missing or to appear in unexpected places. Guests report setting down their room key or wallet in a specific location, only to find it elsewhere later. Clothes hung in the closet are sometimes found on the floor. Items placed on the dresser migrate to the nightstand. These movements are subtle enough that they could be attributed to forgetfulness or carelessness, except that they happen with such frequency in room 441 that they become part of the room's legend. The mirrors in room 441, both the large mirror over the dresser and the bathroom mirror, have been the subject of numerous eerie accounts. Some guests report seeing movement in the mirror's reflection, glimpses of shadow or shape that shouldn't be there. Others describe looking into the mirror and having the unsettling sensation that something is looking back, that the reflection shows not just the room, but something else, something additional that exists in the mirror, but not in the physical space. Sounds have always been a major component of a room 441 experience. Beyond the famous step thump of Peg Leg Johnny's walk, guests report hearing whispers, sighs, and occasionally what sounds like quiet crying. These sounds seem to come from within the room itself, not from neighboring rooms or the hallway. They're described as distinctly human but indistinct, words just below the threshold of comprehension, emotions just beyond the edge of understanding. The window in room 441 has its own peculiarities. Guests report that it opens on its own, even when locked. This is particularly unnerving given that the room is on the 11th floor, making an open window a genuine safety hazard. Housekeeping staff have reported finding the window wide open when they enter to clean, despite knowing it was closed and locked when they last serviced the room. The hotel eventually installed additional security measures on the window, but reports of it mysteriously opening have continued. One particularly disturbing aspect of room 441's legend involves sleep paralysis experiences reported by guests. Sleep paralysis, a condition where a person wakes but finds themselves temporarily unable to move or speak, is a natural phenomenon that affects many people occasionally. However, guests in room 441 report experiencing sleep paralysis at a higher rate than statistical averages would suggest. Moreover, many describe seeing or sensing a figure in a room during these episodes, standing at the foot of the bed or sitting in the chair, watching them as they lie helpless. The room's closet deserves special mention in any catalog of room 441's phenomena. Multiple guests have reported feeling uneasy about the closet, describing a sense of dread or anxiety focused specifically on that area of the room. Some refuse to hang their clothes there, preferring to leave everything in their suitcases or to drape garments over furniture. A few guests have reported seeing the closet door open on its own, or hearing sounds emanating from inside the closet, scuffling or rustling that suggests movement within. Photographic evidence from room 441 is frustratingly inconclusive, as is typical with most paranormal investigation. Some guests have taken pictures in the room showing unexpected orbs of light, lens flares, or foggy patches that they claim weren't visible to the naked eye when the photo was taken. Skeptics correctly point out that such anomalies can be explained by dust particles, camera malfunction, or simple photographic artifacts. Yet the sheer volume of such photos from this one room, compared to other rooms in the hotel, is statistically interesting, if not evidentially convincing. Video footage from room 441 presents similar ambiguities. Paranormal investigation teams who have set up cameras in the room have captured odd light anomalies, unexplained shadows moving across walls, and in a few cases, what appear to be objects moving on their own. However, none of this footage is definitive enough to convince hardcore skeptics, and the hotel's management has been careful not to officially endorse any particular piece of evidence. The question of whether room 441 is actually haunted cannot be definitively answered. What can be stated with certainty is that this particular room has generated an extraordinary number of unusual reports over many decades, far more than statistical variation would predict. Whether these reports reflect genuine paranormal activity, psychological suggestion amplified by the room's reputation, environmental factors unique to the room's construction and location, or some combination of all these factors remains a matter of debate. What makes the room 441 legend particularly compelling is its persistence and consistency. The reports span generations. Guests who knew nothing of the room's reputation have described experiences remarkably similar to those reported by others. Hotel staff, who have no financial incentive to perpetuate ghost stories that might frighten away guests, nevertheless speak of the room with a mixture of respect and wariness. Something about room 441 is different, even if the precise nature of that difference remains elusive. The hotel's response to room 441's reputation has evolved over the years. For decades, management tried to downplay or ignore the stories, concerned that publicity about a haunted room would damage the hotel's reputation. Guests who complained about strange experiences were quietly moved to different rooms without much discussion. The room was kept in regular rotation, available for booking like any other. In more recent years, as public interest in paranormal phenomena has grown and ghost tourism has become a recognized niche in the travel industry, the hotel's stance has softened somewhat. While still not officially advertising room 441 as haunted, the hotel acknowledges the room's reputation and has been known to accommodate guests specifically requesting to stay there. On certain nights, particularly around Halloween, room 441 books up months in advance with ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts eager to experience the legend firsthand. Yet the room remains fundamentally just a hotel room. People sleep there, shower there, watch television there. Most experience nothing unusual whatsoever. They check out the next morning with no complaints, no stories to tell, no sense that they've spent the night in one of America's most haunted rooms. This normalcy is perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. Room 441 doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform on command. It simply is, waiting patiently through quiet nights and busy days, occasionally reminding visitors that some questions have no easy answers. The legend of room 441 has grown far beyond the confines of the room itself. It has spread through paranormal literature, television shows, internet forums, and word of mouth. The room has been featured in documentaries about haunted locations, investigated by celebrity ghost hunters, and discussed in countless late-night conversations among those fascinated by the unexplained. Yet at its core, the story remains simple: a room where something lingers, something that might have been a man named Johnny, who never quite left the place where he drew his last breath. The captain's story, Peg Leg Johnny. To understand room 441, we must attempt to understand the man who allegedly haunts it. But who was Peg Leg Johnny? The historical record offers frustratingly little concrete information. No employment records from the Congress Plaza Hotel list a maintenance man or porter named Johnny who lost a leg. No death certificates from the era clearly match the legend. No newspaper obituaries commemorate his passing. Like many ghosts, Johnny exists more fully in legend than in documented history. His story cobbled together from decades of oral tradition, staff rumors, and guest accounts. The nickname Peg Leg Johnny suggests a man defined by his disability and his amputation becoming his most memorable characteristic. In the early 20th century, prosthetic technology was far less advanced than today. A person who lost a leg would typically be fitted with a wooden prosthetic if they could afford one at all. These devices were functional but crude, offering basic mobility but nothing approaching the natural gait of complete leg. The distinctive sound such a prosthetic would make on hard floors became Johnny's sonic signature, the sound that would later echo through the corridors of the Congress Plaza Hotel long after its maker had died. According to the most detailed versions of the legend, Johnny arrived in Chicago sometime in the early 1900s, possibly as early as 1905, though some accounts push this date back into the 1890s. He came from somewhere else, as so many Chicagoans did during that era of massive migration and urban growth. Some stories claim he was a sailor, his leg lost in a shipboard accident, which would explain both his nickname Captain in some versions and his presence in a city with a major port. Other accounts suggest he was a railroad worker, injured in the dangerous work of laying track or maintaining the massive rail yards that made Chicago the nation's transportation hub. The Chicago Johnny encountered would have been a city of stark contrasts. The wealthy lived in opulence, while the poor struggled in tenements and flop houses. The grand hotels along Michigan Avenue catered to the affluent, while just blocks away, people slept in doorways and under bridges. Johnny existed somewhere between these extremes, surviving through odd jobs, tips, and the occasional charity of those better off than himself. His relationship with the Congress Plaza Hotel seems to have developed gradually. In an era before strict security and formal employment processes, someone like Johnny could make himself useful around a large establishment through initiative and persistence. Perhaps he started by carrying bags for arriving guests, accepting tips for this unrequested service. Maybe he ran errands for hotel staff, fetching cigarettes or newspapers, delivering messages to guests. Over time, he became a familiar presence, someone the doormen and bellhops recognized, someone who knew his way around the building's maze-like corridors. The hotel staff would have had mixed feelings about Johnny. On one hand, he was useful, willing to perform tasks that official employees might find beneath them or didn't have time for. On the other hand, he was an outsider, someone who didn't quite fit into the hotel's carefully maintained image of elegance and service. Some staff members probably befriended him, appreciating his hustle and his knowledge of the city. Others likely resented him, seeing him as competition for tips or as an embarrassment to the establishment. Johnny's appearance, if the descriptions passed down through hotel lore are accurate, was that of a man worn down by hard living. Most accounts describe him as middle-aged, though hard times can make people look older than their years. He dressed in whatever clothes he could afford or acquire, probably a mixture of worn items and cast-offs for better-dressed men. His wooden leg would have required constant maintenance, the leather straps adjusted, the wood oiled to prevent cracking, the whole apparatus kept as functional as limited resources would allow. His personality remains a matter of speculation, though certain traits emerge consistently in the stories told about him. He was resourceful, able to find ways to earn money and survive in a city that could be brutally indifferent to those without steady employment. He was knowledgeable about the hotel and the surrounding neighborhood, information he could trade for coins or favors. Some accounts describe him as friendly, quick with a joke or a story. Others portray him as more solitary, keeping to himself unless there was money to be made. Johnny's drinking is a consistent element across versions of the legend. Whether this was full-blown alcoholism or simply the moderate drinking common among working-class men of the era varies, depending on who's telling the story. What seems clear is that Johnny spent time in the saloons and taverns that dotted Chicago's downtown, places where a man could nurse a beer, get warm, and pass time among others in similar circumstances. His drinking may have been recreational, or it may have been a way to cope with chronic pain from his amputation, as medical care for such injuries was limited and pain management often consisted of little more than alcohol or laudanum. The question of how Johnny ended up in room 441 on the night he died has several possible answers, none definitively proven. One version suggests he had been hired to do some work in the room, perhaps moving furniture or making a repair, and stayed there after drinking too much to make it back to wherever he usually spent his nights. Another account claims he was hiding in the room, taking unauthorized shelter in a space he knew would be vacant. A third possibility, more sinister, suggests he was lured there for purposes unknown, perhaps robbery or violence. The circumstances of his death are equally murky. If Johnny died of natural causes exacerbated by alcohol, it might have been a heart attack, stroke, or alcohol poisoning. The combination of hard living, inadequate nutrition, and heavy drinking could easily prove fatal to a middle-aged man in an era before modern emergency medicine. If he was murdered, the motive might have been robbery, revenge over a gambling debt, or simply random violence. If he took his own life, it could have been despair over his circumstances, chronic pain, or a moment of drunken desperation. What happened after Johnny's body was discovered depends on which version of the story you believe. In the most straightforward telling, his body was found by hotel staff. The police were called, and he was buried in a potter's field or pauper's grave somewhere in the Chicago area. His death would have been noted in police records and perhaps mentioned in a newspaper's minor death notices. Those searches through historical archives have failed to turn up anything definitive. More elaborate versions of the legend suggest a cover-up. Perhaps the hotel's management, concerned about the bad publicity of a death in one of their rooms, arranged for Johnny's body to be removed discreetly. In an era when corruption was common and police were often willing to look the other way for the right price, such a scenario isn't impossible. The body might have been taken out through service entrances, transported to an unknown location, and buried without proper documentation. The most dramatic version of the legend claims that Johnny's body was never found, that it somehow disappeared from the room, leading to speculation about everything from mob involvement to supernatural intervention. This version strains credibility but persists in some retellings, adding to the mystery and tragedy of Johnny's story. Regardless of the specific details of his death and burial, what's clear from the legend is that Johnny was a man who fell through the cracks of society. He had no family to claim his body or demand a proper investigation. He had no wealth to ensure he would be remembered. He was one of thousands of marginal people in early 20th century Chicago, living on the edges, surviving day to day, unimportant to the powerful and unmourned in death. Yet Johnny achieved in death what he never could in life. He became unforgettable. The man who was barely noticed by the wealthy guests staying at the Congress Plaza Hotel became the room's most permanent resident. His distinctive walk, that step-thump rhythm that identified him in life, became the hotel's most famous sound. The room where he died, which should have been forgotten as soon as his body was carried out, became legendary. There's a tragic poetry to Johnny's story, if story it is. He spent his life working around the wealthy, seeing their luxury but never sharing in it, sleeping rough while others slept in comfortable beds just floors above. In death, he finally got what he never had in life. A permanent place to stay, a room of his own, and most importantly, recognition. People know about Peg-Leg Johnny now. They talk about him, tell his story, even if the details are uncertain. He has achieved a kind of immortality. The psychological appeal of Johnny's legend is powerful. He represents the forgotten underclass, the people who keep society functioning but receive little recognition or reward. His ghost, if ghost it is, serves as a reminder that everyone has a story that lives we dismiss as unimportant might have depths and complexities we never see. There's something essentially American about the story, too. The marginal man, the hustler surviving on his wits, the tragic end in a place of wealth he could only visit but never truly enter. Some who claim to have encountered Johnny's spirit in room 441 describe a sense not of malevolence, but of melancholy. The presence feels sad, they say, lost rather than angry, confused rather than threatening. This characterization fits the narrative of a man who didn't choose to stay, but simply couldn't leave, tethered to the place of his death by trauma, unfinished business, or the simple weight of sudden, unexpected mortality. Modern paranormal investigators who have studied room 441 often frame Johnny's haunting in terms of residual energy. This theory suggests that traumatic or emotionally intense events can somehow imprint themselves on a location, creating a kind of recording that plays back under certain conditions. Johnny's death, if it occurred in room 441, would certainly qualify as traumatic enough to create such an imprint. The theory doesn't require Johnny's conscious spirit to be present, just the energy of that final night, captured somehow in the fabric of the room itself. Others interpret the phenomena in room 441 as evidence of an intelligent haunting, suggesting that Johnny's consciousness or spirit remains aware and interactive. The instances of objects being moved, doors opening, or electronics being manipulated suggest deliberate action rather than mere residual replay. If this interpretation is correct, Johnny might still be going about his business, existing in room 441 much as he existed in life. Present but not quite belonging there, but not quite seen, occupying space in the margins. The truth about Peg-Leg Johnny, assuming there is a truth to discover, probably lies buried in documents that were never properly filed, newspapers that have crumbled to dust, or memories that died with people generations ago. He may have been exactly as the legend describes, or he may have been someone quite different. He may have never existed at all, a composite character created from multiple deaths, multiple stories, multiple forgotten men who passed through the Congress Plaza Hotel over the decades. What we can say with certainty is that the legend of Peg Leg Johnny has taken on a life of its own, independent of whatever historical reality might underpin it. He has become part of the hotel's identity, as much a fixture as the marble columns in the lobby or the crystal chandeliers in the ballroom. Guests ask about him. Staff tell his story. Paranormal enthusiasts seek evidence of his presence. In this way, Johnny has achieved something many wealthy men who stayed at the Congress Plaza Hotel never did. He has truly left his mark on the place, become genuinely unforgettable. As you lie in bed listening to this story, perhaps you can imagine Johnny's final night. The room would have looked different then, furnished in the style of the early 1900s, lit by electric lights that were still a novelty, the sounds of the city different through the window, horse-drawn carriages instead of automobiles, different rhythms, different energies. Johnny, in whatever circumstances brought him there, experiencing his last moments of consciousness in a room that would never forget him. The tragedy of Johnny's story isn't just that he died alone in a hotel room. The tragedy is that he lived alone, too, unseen and unvalued by the society that surrounded him. His death was probably considered unremarkable at the time, just another unfortunate man meeting an unfortunate end. The hotel staff would have cleaned the room, changed the linens, and rented it to the next guest without much thought for the life that had ended there. But somehow, in ways we don't fully understand, room 441 remembered. The building remembered. And now, more than a century later, we remember too, telling Johnny's story on dark nights, keeping him alive through words even as we acknowledge how little we truly know about who he was. Guest encounters through the decades. The documented accounts of strange experiences in room 441 span many decades, though documented, must be understood loosely, as most of these stories come to us through informal channels rather than official reports. Hotels, understandably, don't maintain archives of ghost sightings, and guests who experience something unsettling often don't file formal complaints, especially if they're not certain what they experienced or fear being dismissed as crazy. Nevertheless, enough accounts have accumulated over the years to paint a picture of consistent phenomena occurring in and around room 441. One of the earliest recorded accounts dates to the 1950s, found in a letter written by a traveling salesman to a friend. The letter surfaced years later when the friend's descendants were sorting through old papers, and a copy eventually made its way to paranormal researchers studying the Congress Plaza Hotel. The salesman described checking into the hotel late one night after a long drive from Milwaukee. He'd been assigned room 441, though he noted nothing unusual about this at the time. According to his letter, the salesman unpacked and prepared for bed, exhausted from his journey. He fell asleep quickly, but woke sometime in the early morning hours to the sound of someone walking in the hallway outside his room. This wouldn't have been particularly unusual in a busy hotel, except that the footsteps had a strange quality to them. He described them as uneven, one regular footfall followed by what sounded like a piece of wood hitting the floor. The pattern repeated. Step, thump, step, thump, step, thump, getting louder as whatever was making the sound approached his room. The salesman wrote that he felt an inexplicable dread as the sound grew closer. When the footsteps stopped directly outside his door, he forced himself to get up and look through the peephole. The hallway was empty, completely empty, He emphasized in the letter, with no sign that anyone had been there. Shaken, he went back to bed, but couldn't sleep, listening as the same footsteps repeated several more times during the night, always approaching his door, always stopping outside, always revealing nothing when he checked. In the morning, the salesman mentioned the strange occurrence to the front desk clerk while checking out. According to his letter, the clerk's expression changed, becoming guarded. The clerk asked which room he'd been in, and when the salesman said 441, the clerk simply nodded and offered him a discount on his next stay, suggesting he might want to request a different room. The salesman left Chicago confused and unsettled, and his letter indicates he never stayed at the Congress Plaza Hotel again. The 1960s brought several notable accounts, including one from a young couple on their honeymoon. They had splurged on a stay at the Congress, viewing it as romantic to stay in such a historic hotel. Their experience in room 441, however, was anything but romantic. According to their later testimony to a paranormal investigation group, they checked in late afternoon and went out for dinner, returning to the room around 10 in the evening. Upon opening the door, they found the room in complete disarray. The bed they had neatly made before leaving was torn apart, sheets and blankets scattered across the floor. Drawers had been pulled open, and their belongings were strewn about the room. Their first thought was that they'd been robbed, but a quick inventory revealed that nothing was missing. All their valuables, including the wife's jewelry and the cash the husband had left in his wallet, remained untouched. The couple immediately called the front desk, and security came to investigate. The hotel staff seemed genuinely baffled. The door showed no signs of forced entry, and no one reported seeing anyone suspicious enter or leave the room. The security officer checked the rooms on either side. Neighbors had heard nothing unusual. A manager was summoned, and after some discussion, the couple was offered a different room and a partial refund for their trouble. What makes this account particularly interesting is what happened the next morning. The couple, now in a different room, happened to pass by 441 in the hallway. Through the open door, they could see housekeeping staff cleaning the room, and on impulse, the husband stopped to chat with one of the maids. When he mentioned what had happened the previous night, the maid's expression became knowing. "Oh, you had 441, she said, as if that explained everything. She told them that the captain sometimes got restless and made a mess, that it happened every few weeks or so. The maid seemed completely matter-of-fact about it, treating a ghost ransacking a room as just another housekeeping challenge. A businessman's account from the mid-1970s provides another layer to the room 441 legend. This man, whose written statement was preserved by a paranormal research organization, was attending a conference at the hotel and had been assigned room 441. He was a self-described skeptic with no belief in ghosts or the supernatural. His first night passed without incident, and he went about his conference activities the next day with no concerns. The second night, however, brought experiences he couldn't explain. He returned to room 441 around midnight after drinks with colleagues. As he prepared for bed, he heard water running in the bathroom. Thinking he'd accidentally left the faucet on, he went to turn it off, only to find the bathroom completely dry, no water running anywhere. Puzzled but not yet alarmed, he assumed he'd been hearing water pipes in the walls. He got into bed and turned off the lights. Almost immediately, he heard that distinctive step-thump sound, but this time it was in the room with him, not in the hallway. He fumbled for the light switch and turned it on. The room was empty. The sound stopped the moment the lights came on. He left the lights on and tried to sleep, but several times throughout the night, he felt the bed move as if someone had sat down on the edge of the mattress. Each time, he would look, and each time, there was nothing to see. By morning, the businessman was exhausted and unnerved. He mentioned his experience to other conference attendees at breakfast, and to his surprise, one of them knew about room 441's reputation. This colleague explained the legend of Peg Leg Johnny, information the businessman had never heard before. Skeptic or not, the businessman requested a room change for his remaining nights at the hotel, and his written statement concludes with an admission that he couldn't explain what he'd experienced, but remained convinced that something unusual was happening in that room. The 1980s brought accounts with a more modern twist, as guests began carrying cameras more regularly. One couple staying in room 441 took several photographs of each other in the room, standard tourist snapshots to document their Chicago vacation. When they developed the film, they claimed several of the photos showed a strange fog or mist in the room, particularly concentrated in the area around the closet. The couple insisted the room had been clear when they took the photos, with no smoke, steam, or anything that could explain the foggy appearance. They sent copies of the photographs to the hotel, hoping for an explanation. According to their later interview with a paranormal magazine, the hotel's response was apologetic but vague, suggesting the fog might have been a development error and offering them a complimentary night on their next visit. The couple kept the photographs, and while skeptics have suggested various mundane explanations for the fog, ranging from camera malfunction to cigarette smoke, the couple maintained until their later years that something was strange about room 441. A particularly detailed account comes from the early 1990s, when a journalist staying at the hotel decided to deliberately request room 441 after hearing about its reputation. She planned to write an article debunking the ghost stories, approaching the room with professional skepticism. Her article, eventually published in a regional magazine, documents her transformation from skeptic to believer over the course of 2 nights. The first night, she set up a tape recorder to run while she slept, hoping to capture any unusual sounds. In the morning, she reviewed the tape and found long periods of normal hotel ambience, the hum of air conditioning, distant traffic noise. But around 3 in the morning on the recording, a series of distinct knocks could be heard, followed by what sounded like footsteps in the room. The journalist had been asleep during this time and heard nothing, but the recorder had captured it clearly. Intrigued despite her skepticism, she spent the second night more alert, dozing lightly rather than sleeping deeply. Around 2 in the morning, she was awakened by the sensation of someone sitting on the end of her bed. She could feel the mattress depress, could sense a presence in the room, but when she turned on the light, she was alone. Unsettled, but determined to understand what was happening, she sat up in bed and spoke aloud, addressing the empty room. "If someone's here," she said, feeling foolish even as she did it, "could you give me a sign?" According to her article, almost immediately after she spoke, the closet door, which had been closed, slowly swung open. She watched it happen, the door moving smoothly and deliberately, not the way a door would swing from a gust of wind or a settling building. The journalist sat frozen, watching the open closet for several minutes before finally getting up to close it. She spent the rest of the night awake, lights on, fully dressed, sitting in the chair by the window. Nothing else happened, but the journalist had experienced enough. Her article, rather than debunking the legend of room 441, lent it credibility. She concluded that while she couldn't prove the room was haunted, she had experienced things that defied easy explanation and she understood why the stories persisted. The late 1990s and early 2000s brought a new kind of visitor to room 441, the deliberate ghost hunter. As paranormal investigation became popularized through television shows and books, people began seeking out reputedly haunted locations, room 441 among them. The hotel, cautious about its reputation but recognizing a business opportunity, began quietly allowing paranormal groups to book the room, though they rarely advertised this explicitly. One amateur paranormal investigation group's account from 2003 is particularly thorough. They set up multiple cameras, EMF, electromagnetic field, detectors, digital voice recorders, and temperature sensors throughout the room. Over the course of one night, they documented several anomalies. Their EMF detectors spiked repeatedly in the corner near the closet, despite no obvious source of electromagnetic energy. Temperature readings showed unexplained cold spots moving around the room. Their voice recorders captured what they claim are EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, sounds that might be words but are too distorted to make out clearly. The group's most striking claim involves their video footage. One of their cameras, set up to record the room's interior while the investigators took a break in the hallway, allegedly captured a shadow moving across the wall. The video shows what appears to be the shadow of a person walking past the camera, but nothing visible in the room that could be casting such a shadow. Skeptics have suggested various explanations, from light coming through the window, from passing cars to artifacts in the video recording, but the investigation group insists they've ruled out these possibilities. A different kind of account comes from a hotel housekeeper who worked at the Congress Plaza for over 20 years, from the late 1980s through the late 2000s. In an interview preserved in a paranormal research database, she describes room 441 as the room she least liked to clean. She never experienced anything frightening, she emphasized, but the room always felt different, felt watched. Objects in the room seemed to move on their own, she said, not dramatically, but subtly. She would place her cleaning cart in one position and turn around to find it had shifted. She would hang towels in the bathroom only to find them on the floor minutes later. The housekeeper also reported that room 441 went through cleaning supplies faster than other rooms. Air freshener would run out more quickly. The room seemed to attract dust and dirt that required extra effort to remove. Most strangely, she noticed that the room's Bible, the standard Gideon Bible found in most American hotel rooms, would frequently go missing from 441. The hotel would replace it, and within weeks, it would disappear again. She had no explanation for this, but it happened often enough that she and other housekeepers joked that Johnny must not be religious. More recent accounts from the 2010s and 2020s reflect the modern era of smartphones and social media. Guests posting about their stays in room 441 often include photos and videos, though the quality of evidence remains debatable. Common reports include phones and other electronics draining battery unusually quickly, difficulty maintaining Wi-Fi connection even when other rooms on the floor have no issues, and photos showing unexpected orbs or shadows. One guest video from 2017, posted to YouTube and subsequently shared widely on paranormal forums, shows what appears to be the room's television turning on by itself. The guest had set up their phone to record while they stepped out to get ice. The video shows the empty room, quiet and still, when suddenly the television powers on, displaying static briefly before switching to a random channel. The guest returns moments later, clearly surprised to find the TV on. While skeptics note that televisions can malfunction or respond to radio frequency interference, the timing and the guest's genuine reaction make it a compelling piece of evidence for believers. Another modern account describes a guest using a ghost hunting app on their smartphone, software that claims to detect paranormal activity through changes in electromagnetic fields and other sensors. The guest, staying in room 441 out of curiosity about the legends, activated the app and recorded what happened. According to their social media post, the app immediately began showing activity, with words appearing on the screen that the app claimed were messages from spirits, Johnny, Leg, Help, and others. While such apps are widely dismissed by serious paranormal researchers as entertainment rather than legitimate investigation tools, the guest found the experience unsettling enough to check out early. The consistency across these decades of accounts is what makes the Room 441 legend so enduring. The details vary, the interpretations differ, but certain elements repeat. The distinctive step-thump sound, the sense of a presence in the room, objects moving or disappearing, electronics behaving strangely, the bed moving as if someone had sat or laid down on it. These common threads appear in accounts from people who had no knowledge of the room's reputation before experiencing something unusual, lending credibility to the idea that something genuine, whatever its nature, happens in room 441. Not every guest in room 441 experiences anything unusual, of course. Thousands of people have stayed in that room over the decades and slept peacefully, noticed nothing strange, and checked out the next morning with no stories to tell. This inconsistency is typical of allegedly haunted locations. Paranormal activity, if it exists, doesn't seem to operate on a schedule or perform on command. It's sporadic, unpredictable, and highly subjective. One person might experience something dramatic, while another person in the same room hours later notices nothing at all. The psychological question of suggestion and expectation can't be ignored when examining these accounts. How many guests went into room 441 already knowing its reputation, primed to interpret any unusual sound or sensation as paranormal? How much does expecting to experience something strange influence what we actually experience? These are valid questions that responsible investigators must consider. However, they don't fully explain the accounts from guests who had no prior knowledge of the room's history or from hotel staff with no incentive to perpetuate ghost stories. As you drift towards sleep, consider these accumulated accounts, these decades of whispered stories and strange experiences. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Room 441 has undeniably affected people, creating memories and experiences that they remember years or even decades later. The room has become a character in its own right, a space with a personality and a story that continues to evolve with each new guest who walks through its door. The hotel's other hauntings. While Room 441 receives the most attention and has the most developed legend, it is far from the only location within the Congress Plaza Hotel where strange phenomena have been reported. The building, with its long history and complex architecture, seems to be a collection of haunted spaces, each with its own stories and its own alleged spirits. Understanding these other hauntings provides context for Room 441 and suggests that whatever is happening at the Congress Plaza Hotel, it extends far beyond a single room. The Gold Room, that magnificent ballroom that once hosted Chicago's most elegant social events, carries its own ghostly reputation. The room, with its gilt decorations and mirrors, has been the site of countless weddings, receptions, and celebrations over more than a century. With so much joy and so much emotion concentrated in one space over so many decades, perhaps it's not surprising that some claim the energy lingers. Staff members who work events in the Gold Room have reported strange occurrences, particularly when setting up or breaking down events during the quiet hours when the room is empty. The most common report involves the sound of music and laughter echoing through the empty ballroom, phantom sounds of celebrations long past. One event coordinator described arriving early one morning to prepare for a wedding, only to hear what sounded like a full orchestra playing a waltz. The sound was clear enough that she assumed another event was still ongoing, but when she entered the ballroom, it was completely empty, chairs still stacked along the walls, no evidence that anyone had been there. Another frequently reported phenomenon in the Gold Room involves the mirrors. The room's walls are adorned with large, ornate mirrors that create an effect of infinite space when the chandeliers are lit. Several staff members and guests have reported seeing figures in these mirrors, reflections of people who aren't actually in the room. These sightings are typically brief, glimpses of someone in old-fashioned clothing visible in the mirror for a moment before vanishing. One catering worker described seeing a woman in what appeared to be a 1920s-style flapper dress standing in the corner of the room when she glanced in a mirror, but when she turned to look directly at that corner, no one was there. The hotel's basement and sub-basement levels have a particularly ominous reputation among staff. These areas, which house mechanical systems, storage, and various back-of-house operations, are a maze of corridors and rooms, some dating back to the hotel's original construction. The basement's layout reflects the building's piecemeal expansion, with sections that don't quite line up, hallways that dead-end unexpectedly, and rooms whose original purpose has been forgotten. Maintenance workers report a pervasive sense of unease in certain sections of the basement, particularly in the oldest areas. Shadows seem to move independently of any light source. Footsteps echo through empty corridors. Doors to storage rooms that were left open are found closed, or vice versa. One longtime maintenance supervisor described certain basement corridors as places his staff actively avoided, taking longer routes to reach their destinations rather than walk through these unsettling spaces. The most specific basement legend involves a storage room in the oldest section of the sub-basement. According to several staff accounts, this particular room, used for storing obsolete furniture and equipment, is consistently colder than surrounding areas, even though it has the same heating as the rest of the basement. Workers entering the room report feeling watched and describe an oppressive atmosphere that makes them want to leave quickly. Several staff members refuse to enter the room alone, insisting on working in pairs when they need to access anything stored there. One maintenance worker's account describes entering this basement storage room to retrieve a ladder and hearing what sounded like someone breathing heavily in the darkness beyond his flashlight's beam. When he called out to ask who was there, the breathing stopped, replaced by the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. The worker left the room immediately, ladder forgotten, and refuses to go back. When he later mentioned the experience to other staff, several admitted they'd heard similar sounds in that room. The Congress Plaza Hotel's elevators, those brass and mirror-lined boxes that carry guests between floors, have their own collection of strange stories. The most common report involves elevators stopping at floors where no one called for them and where no one is waiting. This happens frequently enough that it's almost expected, particularly late at night. An elevator will be traveling between floors, and without anyone pressing a button, it will stop, The doors will open to an empty hallway, pause for several seconds as if waiting for someone to enter, then close again and continue its journey. More unsettling are the reports of people actually appearing in elevators between floors. Multiple guests have described stepping into an elevator and noticing another passenger, only to realize during the ride that this person has unusual qualities. Slightly translucent appearance, clothing from a different era, or most disturbing, no reflection in the elevator's mirrors. In these accounts, the mysterious passenger typically exits at one of the higher floors, often the 11th floor where room 441 is located, leaving the original passenger unsettled and confused. One guest's detailed account describes entering an elevator in the lobby and finding it already occupied by what he initially took to be a hotel employee, a man in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform. The guest nodded hello and pressed his floor button, but noticed the bellhop hadn't pressed any button. Trying to be helpful, the guest asked what floor the bellhop needed. The uniformed man looked directly at him, the guest reported, and said simply 11 in a voice that sounded distant and hollow. When the elevator reached the 11th floor, the doors opened and the bellhop exited. The guest, now seriously disturbed by the encounter's strange quality, got off at the same floor and watched the uniformed figure walk down the hallway. Halfway down the corridor, the figure simply faded away, becoming transparent and then vanishing entirely. The hotel's staircases, particularly the older service stairs that staff use, also feature in the haunting accounts. These stairwells, unchanged since the early 20th century, are utilitarian spaces, bare concrete and steel, their walls echoing with footsteps. Staff members report hearing someone running up or down the stairs when they're alone in the stairwell, footfalls that seem to come from just out of sight, around the next landing or the previous one. When they investigate, the stairwell is empty, but the sound of running feet continues, always just out of view. One housekeeper described an experience in the South Tower stairwell that left her badly shaken. She was descending from the 12th floor to the basement to retrieve supplies, using the stairs because the service elevator was out of order. Around the 8th floor landing, she heard footsteps above her, someone coming down the stairs quickly. She moved to the side to let them pass, but no one appeared. The footsteps continued, getting louder, the sound clearly descending the stairs, yet she could see no one. The footsteps came down to her level, and she felt a rush of cold air pass her, as if someone had run by at high speed, but she saw nothing. The footsteps continued down past her, fading as they descended. She abandoned her trip to the basement and took the long route through the guest corridors to the main elevators, despite the extra time involved. The hotel's upper floors, above the 11th, have their own scattered reports of phenomena, though none as concentrated as room 441. Guests on the 12th floor have reported hearing children laughing and playing in the hallways late at night, despite the hotel having few child guests and strict rules about noise after 10 p.m. When these guests investigate or call the front desk to complain, the hallways are empty and no other guests report having children with them. The 14th floor, which doesn't actually exist in the traditional sense, the hotel skips from the 13th to the 15th floor, following the common superstition about the number 13, is accessed through service areas and used for storage and mechanical equipment. Staff who work on this floor, which guests rarely see, report it as having a particularly strange atmosphere. The floor's layout is confusing, with corridors that seem to shift and rooms that appear in different locations than expected. Workers describe feeling disoriented on the 14th floor, losing track of time, and occasionally experiencing what they describe as missing time, where they enter the floor to perform a task that should take 15 minutes and emerge an hour later with no sense of where the extra time went. The hotel's restaurants and bars, both current and historical, have their share of stories as well. The Continental Room, which operated as one of the hotel's dining rooms for decades, was the site of several reported apparitions during its years of operation. Waiters and kitchen staff would occasionally glimpse someone sitting at a table in formal evening wear from the 1920s or 30s, often in a corner or alcove that was dimly lit. By the time staff approached to take the mysterious diner's order, the figure would be gone, the chair empty, no sign that anyone had been sitting there. One bartender who worked in the hotel's Florentine room bar during the 1980s and 90s reported that glasses would occasionally fall from shelves or slide across the bar with no apparent cause. This happened infrequently enough that it wasn't a constant problem, but regularly enough that staff came to expect it. The bartender also described the sensation of being watched while working alone to close the bar late at night, a prickly feeling on the back of the neck that would persist until he locked up and left. The hotel's meeting rooms and conference spaces, scattered throughout the building, have fewer ghostly reports, possibly because they're used primarily during business hours when the building is busy and energetic. However, event staff have reported occasional oddities. Presentation equipment that malfunctions in specific rooms but works perfectly when tested elsewhere. Temperature fluctuations that the building's HVAC system can't explain, and the sound of conversations or arguments coming from rooms that are supposed to be empty. One conference organizer described setting up for an early morning meeting and hearing what sounded like an intense argument coming from the meeting room. Thinking early arrivals were having a dispute, she entered the room to find it completely empty, chairs still arranged from the previous day's event, no sign of anyone having been there. Yet as she stood in the doorway, she could still hear the argument, voices raised in anger, though she couldn't make out distinct words. The sound faded as she moved further into the room, disappearing entirely by the time she reached the room's center. The hotel's exterior and rooftop also have associated stories, though these are less frequently reported simply because fewer people access these areas. Guests with rooms facing the building's interior courtyard have occasionally reported seeing figures on the rooftop or in windows of unoccupied rooms, silhouettes that appear briefly and then vanish. One guest photographed what she claimed was a woman in old-fashioned dress standing on a balcony several floors up, but when hotel staff checked, there was no balcony at that location, just a solid wall. The hotel's history as a labor dispute site adds another layer to its haunting lore. In 2003, hotel workers went on strike, a labor action that continued for years and was marked by picketing, protests, and considerable animosity. Some believe that the intense emotions associated with the strike added to the building's supernatural energy, creating new hauntings or intensifying existing ones. Since the strike, staff have reported an increase in unusual phenomena throughout the building, though it's difficult to determine whether this represents a genuine increase or simply heightened awareness and more willingness to report experiences. One particularly tragic element of the hotel's history involves a window washer who fell to his death while working on the building's exterior sometime in the 1920s or 30s. The exact date and details are unclear, lost to time, and spotty record-keeping, but the story persists among staff. According to legend, the window washer's ghost occasionally appears on the building's exterior, particularly on the Michigan Avenue-facing side, recreating his fall, or simply standing on impossible surfaces, defying gravity as he works on windows that no longer exist in the configuration they had in his lifetime. The variety and distribution of these hauntings throughout the Congress Plaza Hotel suggest several possibilities. If the phenomena are genuine paranormal events, the hotel might be what some researchers call a haunted complex, a location where multiple spirits or energies exist simultaneously, each attached to different areas or aspects of the building. This wouldn't be unique. Many old hotels, hospitals, and large buildings with long histories report similar patterns of scattered hauntings. Alternatively, the various reports might reflect the power of suggestion and storytelling. The Congress Plaza Hotel has a reputation as haunted, and this reputation might prime people to interpret normal, explainable events as supernatural. Elevators malfunction in old buildings. Heating and cooling systems create temperature inconsistencies. Buildings settle and creak. Shadows cast by passing cars can create optical illusions. In a building with a ghostly reputation, these mundane occurrences might be interpreted as paranormal. A third possibility is that some combination of genuine anomalies and suggestion creates the pattern of reported hauntings. Perhaps certain areas of the hotel do experience legitimate, unexplained phenomena, while stories about these areas then spread and inspire similar reports elsewhere in the building, even where nothing unusual is actually happening. This hybrid explanation accounts for both the consistency of certain reports and the variation in others. What's clear is that the Congress Plaza Hotel's reputation as haunted extends well beyond room 441. The building has accumulated over a century's worth of stories, experiences, and legends, creating a rich tapestry. A complex network of supernatural lore. Room 441 may be the most famous haunted location in the hotel, but it's far from alone. The entire building, from its basement depths to its rooftop, from its grand ballrooms to its utilitarian stairwells, carries the weight of history and the whispers of the past. As you listen to these stories in the quiet hours, perhaps you can imagine the Congress Plaza Hotel not as a single haunted room, but as a collection of stories, each one a thread in the larger narrative of a building that has witnessed so much of human experience. The joy of weddings in the Gold Room, the struggles of workers in the basement, the final moments of people who died within its walls, all of this accumulates, layer upon layer, creating a place where the boundary between past and present seems thinner than in most locations. Paranormal investigations and evidence. The Congress Plaza Hotel has attracted serious paranormal investigators for decades, drawing everyone from local ghost hunting groups to television productions and professional researchers. These investigations have employed increasingly sophisticated equipment and methods, attempting to document and explain the phenomena reported in room 441 and throughout the building. The results, like most paranormal evidence, remain fascinatingly inconclusive, compelling enough to maintain interest, but not definitive enough to convince skeptics. One of the earliest documented investigations of the Congress Plaza Hotel took place in the mid-1990s, conducted by a regional paranormal research group. This team, consisting of about 8 investigators, spent 3 nights in the hotel, focusing primarily on room 441, but also investigating other reportedly haunted areas. Their equipment, advanced for the time, included EMF meters, thermal imaging cameras, audio recording equipment, and standard video cameras. The investigators set up a base camp in room 441, arranging their equipment to monitor different areas of the room continuously. They placed EMF meters at various points, noting that baseline electromagnetic readings in the room were normal, consistent with what you'd expect in a hotel room with standard electrical wiring and appliances. However, throughout the 3 nights, they documented periodic spikes in EMF readings, particularly in the corner near the closet and near the foot of the bed. These spikes couldn't be correlated to any obvious source. They didn't occur when room lights or bathroom fans were turned on and off. They didn't coincide with elevator operation or other electrical systems cycling. The spikes appeared randomly, sometimes lasting seconds, sometimes several minutes, then dropping back to baseline levels. The investigation team noted these anomalies, but acknowledged they couldn't rule out hidden electrical wiring or other mundane causes they weren't aware of. The thermal imaging camera produced some of the investigation's most interesting results. On the second night, around 2:30 in the morning, the camera recorded what appeared to be a distinct cold spot forming near the closet. The temperature in this area dropped approximately 15 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the surrounding room, despite no apparent source for such cooling. The air conditioning was off, the window was closed, and no drafts could be detected. The cold spot persisted for about 20 minutes, gradually dissipating until the room returned to uniform temperature. What made this particularly compelling was that the cold spot appeared to move during this 20-minute period. The thermal camera showed it starting near the closet, then slowly traversing the room toward the bed, then back toward the closet before finally fading. The movement suggested something more than a simple draft or HVAC malfunction, which would typically remain stationary or move in predictable patterns related to air circulation. The audio recordings from this investigation captured several unexplained sounds. Multiple times across the 3 nights, the recorders picked up what sounded like footsteps in the room, despite all investigators being accounted for and remaining still. The footsteps had that characteristic uneven pattern, though the investigators, not familiar with the peg-leg Johnny legend at the time, didn't immediately recognize its significance. They also recorded what sounded like knocking, door creaks, and on one occasion, what might have been a distant voice, though the words, if words they were indecipherable. Perhaps most dramatically, during the early morning hours of the 3rd night, one of the investigators experienced what the team's report describes as possible physical contact. The investigator, sitting in a chair near the window, reported feeling something touch her shoulder, a distinct sensation of fingers briefly squeezing her shoulder. The touch was gentle but unmistakable. It occurred while she was alone in the room, the other team members having stepped into the hallway for a break. The video camera trained on her position captured her reaction, her sudden jolt and look of surprise, but showed nothing in the room that could have touched her. In 2006, a more ambitious investigation took place when a television production focused on haunted locations spent several days at the Congress Plaza Hotel. This investigation had access to significantly more resources and more sophisticated equipment than earlier efforts. The production team set up dozens of cameras throughout the hotel, not just in room 441, but in hallways, the basement, the gold room, and other reportedly active areas. Their investigation of room 441 employed what they called a saturation approach, covering every angle of the room with cameras and sensors. They brought in equipment to measure not just EMF and temperature, but also changes in air pressure, ionization levels, and even infrasound frequencies below the range of human hearing. The idea was to capture as much data as possible, looking for correlations between reported phenomena and measurable environmental factors. The television investigation documented several incidents that made it into the final program. One occurred when an investigator sat alone in room 441, attempting to provoke a response through direct communication. "Johnny," he said, addressing the empty room, "if you're here, can you give us a sign?" Within seconds, one of the cameras recorded the closet door slowly opening, swinging outward with no visible cause. Analysis of the footage showed no strings or other mechanisms, no air movement that might have caused the door to open. The door had been latched closed, requiring deliberate force to open it. Another striking moment came during an investigation of the 11th floor hallway outside room 441. A camera positioned at one end of the hallway, recording in night vision mode, captured what appeared to be a shadow figure moving through the corridor. The figure was humanoid in shape and appeared to be walking, moving from one end of the hallway toward room 441's door. As it approached the room, it seemed to fade, becoming less distinct until it disappeared entirely just before reaching the door. Multiple camera angles recorded this sequence, and while skeptics suggested various explanations from camera artifacts to someone actually walking through the hall, the production team maintained they couldn't identify a prosaic source. The television investigation also conducted experiments attempting to measure the effect of human consciousness on the environment in room 441. They had investigators meditate in the room, attempting to mentally communicate with whatever presence might exist. During these sessions, several cameras recorded strange light phenomena, small moving points of light that drifted through the room. Analysis suggested these weren't insects, dust particles, or camera malfunctions, but the nature of these lights remains unexplained. Independent paranormal researchers continued investigating the Congress Plaza Hotel throughout the late 2000s and 2010s. One team brought equipment designed to measure changes in gravitational fields, working on the theory that if paranormal phenomena involve manipulation of space-time or energy, such manipulation might affect gravity in measurable ways. Their investigation recorded subtle fluctuations in gravitational readings in room 441 during periods when other anomalies were also being detected, though the fluctuations were so small that determining whether they were significant or simply measurement noise remains debatable. Another investigation focused on attempting to capture EVP, electronic voice phenomena, in room 441. The team used multiple high-sensitivity recorders placed throughout the room, recording hours of audio in silence. During playback and analysis, they identified numerous sounds they classified as potential EVP. Most were ambiguous, vague sounds that might or might not be words. However, one sequence seemed clearer, what sounded like a male voice saying, "Get out," or possibly "help out." The phrase, if phrase it was faint and partially obscured by background noise, but it occurred during a period when no one was in the room or the adjacent hallway. The question of orbs has been contentious in paranormal research, with most serious investigators now dismissing the vast majority of orb photographs as simply dust particles, insects, or water droplets illuminated by camera flashes. However, some investigations of room 441 have captured orb phenomena that don't fit these simple explanations. One team recorded video showing what appeared to be a luminous sphere moving through the room in an intelligent pattern, changing direction, stopping, and starting again, behaviors that dust or insects wouldn't typically display. Scientific attempts to explain the phenomena in room 441 have proposed several possibilities. Some researchers suggest the room might be affected by infrasound, low-frequency sound waves below the threshold of conscious hearing. Infrasound can create feelings of unease, anxiety, and even visual hallucinations in some people. If the hotel's mechanical systems or the building's structure produces infrasound in or near room 441, it might explain some guest experiences. However, investigations using infrasound detection equipment have found nothing unusual about room 441's acoustic environment. The frequencies present in the room are within normal ranges and no different from other rooms on the same floor. This doesn't completely rule out infrasound as an explanation, as the phenomenon might be intermittent, occurring only under specific conditions the investigators didn't capture, but it makes it less likely. The electromagnetic field hypothesis suggests that unusual EMF patterns in the room might affect people's brains and nervous systems, creating sensations of presence, anxiety, or visual disturbances. This theory has some scientific support. Experiments have shown that specific electromagnetic field patterns can induce experiences similar to those reported in haunted locations. However, comprehensive EMF mapping of room 441 and its surroundings has not revealed consistent abnormalities that would support this explanation. Carbon monoxide poisoning has been proposed as an explanation for some haunted house experiences, as low-level exposure can cause hallucinations, feelings of dread, and other symptoms. However, room 441 has been tested multiple times for carbon monoxide, and levels have always been normal. The hotel's modern ventilation and heating systems make carbon monoxide buildup highly unlikely. Psychological explanations focus on suggestion and expectation. If guests enter room 441 already knowing its reputation, they might be primed to interpret normal occurrences as paranormal. The creaks and settles of an old building, the sounds of plumbing and HVAC systems, shadows cast by light from windows or hallways, all of these might be noticed and misinterpreted in a room with a haunted reputation when they would be ignored in a room without such associations. This explanation accounts for some of the experiences, particularly those from guests who deliberately sought out room 441 for its paranormal reputation. However, it doesn't fully explain the accounts from people who stayed in the room with no prior knowledge of its history, or the experiences of hotel staff who have worked in the building for years and have developed thick skins against suggestion. Environmental factors unique to the room's construction or location might contribute to the phenomena. Room 441's position in the building, its orientation, its proximity to mechanical systems or structural elements might create conditions that affect sensitive individuals. Perhaps unusual air currents create sounds that the brain interprets as footsteps or knocking. Perhaps vibrations from the building's elevator or mechanical systems create sensations of movement in the bed or furniture. Several investigations have examined the room's physical structure in detail, looking for anything unusual that might explain reported phenomena. The room's dimensions, construction materials, and features are essentially identical to other rooms on the same floor. No hidden spaces, unusual wiring, or structural anomalies have been found. If environmental factors are responsible, they're subtle enough that standard construction analysis hasn't revealed them. The question of whether room 441 is haunted remains unanswered, possibly unanswerable with current investigative methods and technology. The accumulated evidence presents a puzzle. Too many reports and too much documented phenomena to dismiss entirely, yet nothing definitive enough to prove paranormal activity beyond doubt. This ambiguity is frustrating for both believers and skeptics, each camp able to interpret the evidence according to their pre-existing worldview. What investigations have established is that room 441 is different, whether that difference is paranormal, environmental, psychological, or some combination of factors. People continue to have experiences there that they find significant enough to report and remember. Equipment continues to record anomalies that resist easy explanation. The room maintains its reputation and its mysteries despite over a century of occupancy. For researchers, room 441 represents both an opportunity and challenge. The room is accessible, unlike many reportedly haunted locations. It can be investigated repeatedly under controlled conditions. Yet despite this access, despite decades of investigation, despite increasingly sophisticated equipment and methods, the fundamental questions remain. What is happening in room 441? Why does it happen? And what does it tell us about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the possibility that some aspect of human existence persists after death? As you drift deeper into sleep, perhaps consider the limits of what we can know and prove. Some mysteries resist resolution, not because we lack the tools to solve them, but because they operate in realms where our tools cannot reach. Questions that exist at the boundaries of the measurable and the experienced, the objective and the subjective, the dead and the living. Chicago's haunted history context. To fully appreciate room 441's place in paranormal lore, we must zoom out and consider Chicago's broader relationship with ghosts and hauntings. The city has a reputation as one of America's most haunted metropolitan areas, a claim supported by the sheer number of locations with persistent ghost stories and the city's particularly dramatic history of tragedy, violence, and transformation. The Congress Plaza Hotel doesn't exist in isolation, but as part of a larger landscape of Chicago hauntings. Chicago's paranormal reputation begins with its geography and history. The city rose on land that was swamp and prairie, transformed through human will and engineering into one of America's great urban centers. This transformation was violent and quick, accomplished over mere decades through fires, demolitions, and construction on an epic scale. The city has suffered catastrophic disasters, from the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 that destroyed most of the downtown area to numerous factory fires, train wrecks, and maritime disasters that claimed hundreds of lives. The Great Chicago Fire itself is the origin point for numerous hauntings across the city. The fire killed approximately 300 people, destroyed over 17,000 buildings, and left 100,000 people homeless. The catastrophe reshaped Chicago completely, erasing the wooden city that had existed and replacing it with a modern metropolis built of steel and stone. But according to local ghost lore, the fire didn't erase all traces of what came before. Spirits from the pre-fire city allegedly linger at various locations, confused or traumatized by the catastrophe that ended their lives. One of Chicago's most famous haunting stories involves the Iroquois Theater fire of 1903, a disaster that occurred just a few blocks from the Congress Plaza Hotel. The Iroquois was a new, supposedly fireproof theater, lavishly appointed and considered one of the finest in the country. On December 30th, 1903, during a packed holiday matinee performance, a stage light malfunctioned and ignited the scenery. The fire spread with terrifying speed, and the theater's allegedly fireproof construction became a death trap. Over 600 people died in the Iroquois Theater fire, most of them women and children who had come to see a holiday performance. The disaster was exacerbated by locked exit doors, a practice used to prevent people from sneaking in without tickets, and by panic that caused deadly crushes in stairways. Bodies were stacked in piles where people had trampled each other trying to escape. The horror was so profound that it led to sweeping changes in fire safety regulations nationwide. The site of the Iroquois Theater, now occupied by the Oriental Theater, later renamed the James M. Nederlander Theater, is considered one of Chicago's most haunted locations. Staff and performers report seeing ghostly figures in vintage clothing, hearing children's voices and laughter when the theater is empty, and experiencing unexplained cold spots, particularly near the locations where the worst losses occurred. Some performers refuse to use certain dressing rooms, claiming they feel overwhelming sadness or fear in those spaces. The connection between the Iroquois Theater and the Congress Plaza Hotel goes beyond mere proximity. In the aftermath of the fire, several hotels in the area, including the Congress, served as temporary morgues and aid stations. The bodies of fire victims were brought to these hotels for identification by family members, creating scenes of profound grief and trauma. Some paranormal researchers suggest that this use of the Congress as a morgue might have contributed to the building's haunted reputation, adding layers of tragic energy to a structure already rich with human history. Resurrection Mary, perhaps Chicago's most famous ghost, represents another facet of the city's paranormal landscape. Mary is said to haunt Archer Avenue on the city's southwest side, appearing as a young woman in a white dress who hitchhikes along the road. According to legend, Mary asks to be taken to the Resurrection Cemetery, and when the car approaches the cemetery, she vanishes from the vehicle. The story has numerous variations, but the core narrative has remained consistent since the 1930s, with dozens of drivers claiming to have picked up this mysterious hitchhiker. The persistence of the Resurrection Mary legend, like the stories of Room 441, suggests something about how ghost stories function in urban environments. They become part of the local culture, shared stories that connect people to their city's history and to each other. Whether or not Mary's ghost actually appears on Archer Avenue, the story serves a function, reminding Chicagoans of the city's past and creating a sense of mystery in the midst of the mundane. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, one of the most infamous events in Chicago's gangster era, created another haunted location. On February 14th, members of Al Capone's gang, disguised as police officers, lined up 7 members of the rival Bugs Moran gang against a garage wall and executed them with machine guns. The brutality of the killings and the era's sensationalized crime coverage made the massacre internationally famous. The garage where the massacre occurred no longer exists, demolished in 1967, but the site remains a point of paranormal interest. People visiting the location report feeling inexplicably cold or anxious. Some claim to hear the sound of machine gun fire or men screaming. Even after the garage was demolished and the land redeveloped, reports of phenomena continued, suggesting that if tragic events can imprint themselves on locations, the imprint might persist even after the physical structure is gone. The Fort Dearborn Massacre of 1812 represents Chicago's oldest mass tragedy, predating the city's incorporation. During the War of 1812, Fort Dearborn's garrison and a group of settlers attempted to evacuate the fort, marching south along Lake Michigan's shoreline. They were ambushed by Potawatomi warriors, and approximately 60 soldiers and civilians were killed. The massacre site, near what is now 18th Street and Prairie Avenue, is reputedly haunted, with witnesses reporting sounds of battle, screams, and the appearance of figures in period dress. These various hauntings create a context for understanding room 441 and the Congress Plaza Hotel. Chicago is a city built on layers of history, each layer marked by moments of joy, but also significant tragedy. The city's rapid growth meant that disasters, when they occurred, often involved mass casualties. Fires, building collapses, maritime disasters on Lake Michigan, train crashes, and industrial accidents all contributed to a history soaked in sudden death. The Congress Plaza Hotel, built in 1893 and continuously occupied since then, has witnessed all of this history. The building stood when the Iroquois Theater burned. It was opened during the height of the gangster era, hosting both legitimate guests and criminals seeking luxurious accommodation. It operated during Prohibition, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, the turbulent 1960s and 70s, right through to the present day. Over 130 years of Chicago's history has played out with the Congress Plaza Hotel as a silent witness. This longevity and continuous occupation mean the hotel has accumulated its own history of deaths, both natural and otherwise. Hotels of this size and age are where people die. Heart attacks, strokes, suicides, occasional murders, all of these occur in hotels just as they do anywhere people gather. Most deaths leave no supernatural trace. Rooms are cleaned, mattresses replaced, and the next guest checks in with no awareness that someone died in that space weeks, months, or years earlier. But according to paranormal theory, some deaths might create hauntings, particularly deaths that are traumatic, sudden, or involve intense emotion. A person dying peacefully in their sleep might pass on without leaving any mark. A person murdered or dying in terror or confusion might be more likely to create a haunting. If this theory has any validity, then a building like the Congress Plaza Hotel, with over a century of continuous occupation, would be likely to harbor multiple hauntings from various eras. The hotel's architecture also plays into its haunted reputation. The Congress Plaza's maze-like layout, a result of its piecemeal expansion, creates spaces that feel disorienting and otherworldly. Hallways that don't quite line up, staircases that seem to lead nowhere, corridors that dead-end unexpectedly. All of these architectural peculiarities contribute to an atmosphere where strange experiences feel more plausible. The building itself, through its design, predisposes people to find it haunted. Chicago's paranormal research community has given particular attention to the Congress Plaza Hotel, recognizing it as one of the city's most consistently active haunted locations. The hotel appears regularly in ghost tours, paranormal investigation groups included in their research agendas, and local paranormal researchers have built relationships with hotel staff, gaining access to investigate areas not normally open to the public. This attention has created a feedback loop that affects how the hotel's hauntings are perceived and reported. As the hotel's reputation grows, more people seek it out specifically for paranormal experiences, and more experiences get reported and added to the legend. Distinguishing genuine phenomena from experiences colored by expectation becomes increasingly difficult. Yet this same attention also means the hotel has been more thoroughly investigated than most haunted locations, with researchers repeatedly testing and retesting the same spaces, looking for consistent patterns that might reveal underlying truths. The Congress Plaza Hotel's hauntings also reflect broader patterns in American ghost lore. The concept of the residual haunting, where traumatic events create a kind of recording that plays back under certain conditions, might explain some phenomena at the hotel. The idea of intelligent hauntings, where conscious spirits interact with the living, could account for other experiences. And psychological explanations, focusing on how our brains interpret ambiguous stimuli in allegedly haunted locations, provide a skeptical framework that can't be entirely dismissed. Chicago's relationship with its ghosts is pragmatic in a way that reflects the city's broader character. Chicagoans are proud of their haunted locations, incorporating them into the city's tourist infrastructure and local identity. But there's also a healthy skepticism, a Midwestern practicality that balances the supernatural claims. The Congress Plaza Hotel embodies this balance. It's haunted enough to be interesting, to draw curious visitors and paranormal investigators, but functional enough to operate as a regular hotel, hosting conventions and tourists who have no interest in ghosts whatsoever. As you continue your journey towards sleep, consider Chicago itself as a character in these stories. A city built on ambition and tragedy, on transformation and destruction, on layers of history, each marked by moments of intense human experience. The Congress Plaza Hotel isn't just a haunted building. It's a haunted building in a haunted city, a place where the accumulated weight of history seems to have created thin places, locations where the boundary between past and present, between the living and the dead, feels more permeable than in most locations. The science and psychology of hauntings. To truly understand what might be happening in room 441, we need to explore what science and psychology can tell us about hauntings, ghostly encounters, and paranormal experiences. The scientific study of alleged hauntings is a complex field involving psychology, neuroscience, environmental science, and physics, each discipline offering potential explanations for phenomena that people interpret as supernatural. Let's begin with the human brain and its remarkable capacity for creating experiences. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, constantly processing sensory information and making predictions about our environment. This ability served our ancestors well, allowing them to spot predators hiding in bushes or recognize useful plants from poisonous ones. But this same pattern recognition ability can create false positives, seeing patterns where none exist, interpreting random stimuli as meaningful. Pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random or ambiguous stimuli, explains many reported ghost sightings. The classic example is seeing faces in clouds or the man in the moon, but pareidolia applies to auditory experiences as well. Random sounds can be interpreted as voices or footsteps, particularly in environments where we expect such sounds, like an old hotel with a haunted reputation. Our brains, presented with ambiguous auditory information and primed by stories of Peg-Leg Johnny, might construct the perception of uneven footsteps from sounds that actually have more prosaic origins. Sleep-related experiences account for a significant percentage of reported paranormal encounters. Sleep paralysis, the condition where consciousness returns before the body's muscles reactivate, affects approximately 8% of people at some point in their lives, with higher rates among people under stress or with irregular sleep schedules. During sleep paralysis, people often experience a sense of presence in the room, feelings of dread or being watched, and sometimes visual or auditory hallucinations. The connection between sleep paralysis and ghost sightings is well established. Many classic ghost encounter narratives, waking to find an entity in the room, feeling unable to move, experiencing overwhelming fear, match the symptomology of sleep paralysis perfectly. In a hotel room, particularly one with a haunted reputation, a guest experiencing sleep paralysis might interpret the experience as a ghostly visitation rather than a neurological phenomenon. Hypnagogic and hypnopompic hallucinations, experiences that occur while falling asleep or waking up respectively, might explain other reported encounters. During these transitions between waking and sleep, people can experience vivid hallucinations that feel completely real. These hallucinations can be visual, seeing figures or shadows in the room, or auditory, hearing voices, music, or other sounds. Someone experiencing hypnagogic hallucinations in room 441 might see a figure at the foot of the bed or hear the distinctive step-thump footsteps, experiences that feel genuine even though they originate in the brain's transitional state. Environmental factors can significantly influence how we experience a space and can create conditions that people might interpret as haunted. Infrasound, sound waves below the threshold of human hearing, below 20 hertz, has been shown in laboratory conditions to create feelings of unease, anxiety, and in some cases, visual disturbances. Sources of infrasound include wind, traffic, HVAC systems, and structural vibrations in buildings. Vic Tandy, a British engineer, famously demonstrated that infrasound could explain some haunted house experiences. Working in a supposedly haunted laboratory, Tandy experienced sensations of dread and glimpsed a shadowy figure from the corner of his eye. Investigation revealed that a recently installed ventilation fan was producing infrasound at approximately 19 hertz. When the fan was turned off, the phenomena ceased. This case demonstrated that environmental factors could create experiences that feel supernatural but have entirely natural causes. However, attempts to detect anomalous infrasound in reportedly haunted locations, including the Congress Plaza Hotel, have generally not found consistent patterns. While infrasound might explain some experiences in some locations, it doesn't appear to be a universal explanation for hauntings. Electromagnetic fields, EMF, represent another potential environmental factor. Some research suggests that exposure to specific electromagnetic field patterns can affect the brain's temporal lobes, areas involved in memory, emotion, and sensory processing. Stimulation of the temporal lobes can create feelings of presence, déjà vu, anxiety, and even hallucinations. Michael Persinger's research at Laurentian University explored this phenomenon, using what he called the God helmet, a device that applied weak magnetic fields to the temporal lobes. Many subjects exposed to these fields reported sensing a presence in the room with them, feeling spiritual or mystical experiences, or experiencing other phenomena they described as supernatural. Persinger hypothesized that supposedly haunted locations might have electromagnetic anomalies that stimulate visitors' temporal lobes, creating paranormal experiences. This explanation is intriguing but controversial. Later attempts to replicate Persinger's results have had mixed success, and some researchers question whether the experiences his subjects reported were actually caused by magnetic fields or by suggestion and placebo effects. Furthermore, comprehensive EMF surveys of room 441 and other reputedly haunted areas of the Congress Plaza Hotel have not revealed consistent electromagnetic anomalies that would support this explanation. The power of suggestion and expectation cannot be overstated when examining paranormal experiences. Psychological research has repeatedly demonstrated that our expectations shape our perceptions. If you enter a room expecting to encounter a ghost, you're significantly more likely to interpret ambiguous experiences as paranormal. A creaking floorboard becomes ghostly footsteps. A draft becomes the cold touch of spirit. A shadow becomes an apparition. This is not to suggest that people are dishonest or that their experiences aren't real to them. The experiences are genuine. The interpretation may be influenced by expectation. A guest entering room 441, knowing its reputation, is primed to notice and remember any unusual occurrence, while dismissing or forgetting normal hotel room experiences. This cognitive bias means that statistical analysis of haunted room reports must account for the fact that people paying attention to anomalies will find more anomalies than people not specifically looking for them. Group dynamics and social contagion also play roles in how hauntings develop and spread. When one person in a group reports an experience, others become more alert to similar experiences. Shared narratives develop, and group members unconsciously align their reports to fit the emerging story. This doesn't require conscious deception. It's simply how human memory and perception work in social contexts. We influence each other, and our memories of experiences are reconstructed each time we recall them, shaped by subsequent conversations and stories. The Congress Plaza Hotel's haunting narratives have been shaped by over a century of stories, employee conversations, guest reports, and media coverage. Each new account adds to the legend, and each person entering room 441 brings expectations shaped by all the previous stories. Separating what might be genuinely anomalous from what's been constructed through this social process is extraordinarily difficult. From a physics perspective, the question of whether hauntings represent genuine violations of natural law remains open. Mainstream physics provides no mechanism for human consciousness to persist after death in a form that could interact with the physical world. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but human consciousness isn't a form of energy in the physics sense. It's an emergent property of electrochemical processes in the brain. When those processes cease at death, consciousness should cease as well. However, some physicists have proposed more speculative ideas that might theoretically allow for phenomena resembling hauntings. Quantum mechanics, with its observer effects and entanglement phenomena, has inspired various theories about consciousness and reality that might, in principle, allow for something like ghostly persistence. But these ideas remain highly speculative, and no experimental evidence supports them. The gap between quantum mechanics is weird, and therefore ghosts exist, is vast and unbridged. The concept of stone tape theory, proposed by archaeologist T.C. Lethbridge, suggests that traumatic events might somehow be recorded in the physical environment, particularly in materials like stone or magnetic minerals, and played back under certain conditions. This would make hauntings more like recordings than conscious spirits, residual impressions rather than interactive entities. While the theory has intuitive appeal and could explain some types of reported phenomena, no physical mechanism for how such recording and playback could occur has been identified. Psychological and cultural factors also shape what we define as haunting-worthy experiences. Death in hotels was once far more common than it is today, as people traveled less for leisure and more out of necessity, staying in hotels during illness or at the ends of long journeys. Yet only a tiny fraction of these deaths are remembered or said to create hauntings. What makes Peg Leg Johnny's alleged death in room 441 significant, while thousands of other hotel deaths are forgotten? The answer likely involves narrative and meaning. Johnny's story, as it has been constructed, has elements that resonate with people. The marginal man, the tragic end, the humble origins contrasting with the hotel's grandeur. This narrative makes his haunting make sense in ways that a businessman dying quietly of a heart attack in the same room wouldn't. We remember and retell stories that have meaning, and these stories then shape how we interpret our experiences. Cultural context matters enormously in how paranormal experiences are understood. What's interpreted as a ghost in one culture might be understood as a demon, an angel, an ancestor spirit, or a hallucination in another. The specific details of American ghost lore, the types of activities ghosts allegedly engage in, the rules they supposedly follow, have been shaped by centuries of stories, from European folk traditions through Victorian spiritualism to modern paranormal investigation shows. Room 441's haunting fits American ghost narrative conventions perfectly. The tragic death, the unfinished business, Johnny perhaps unaware he's dead or unable to move on. The benign but persistent presence, the physical phenomena like door opening and footsteps. These elements conform to our cultural expectations of what ghosts should be and do, which might tell us more about American culture than about the objective reality of what's happening in a room. Cognitive biases also play significant roles. Confirmation bias leads us to remember and emphasize experiences that confirm our beliefs, while dismissing or forgetting those that contradict them. A believer staying in room 441 will remember every strange sound or odd feeling as evidence of haunting, while forgetting the many hours when nothing unusual occurred. A skeptic might dismiss everything as explained phenomena, while not fully acknowledging genuinely puzzling experiences. The availability heuristic makes us overestimate the probability of events that are easy to recall. Dramatic ghost stories stick in memory far better than stories of uneventful nights in hotel rooms. This creates an illusion that paranormal experiences are more common than they actually are. Room 441 might have 95% of guests experience nothing unusual, but we hear about the 5% who reported something strange, distorting our sense of the room's actual activity level. Yet after accounting for all these psychological, environmental, and social factors, something remains. Not all experiences in room 441 fit neatly into these explanations. The accounts from people with no prior knowledge of the room's reputation. The consistency of certain phenomena across different guests and decades. The recorded evidence that, while not definitive, suggests something unusual occurs there more frequently than in comparable spaces. This residue of unexplained phenomena is what keeps both believers and serious researchers interested. It's possible that future science will provide explanations that we currently don't have, mechanisms we haven't discovered that account for these experiences in natural terms. It's also possible, though most scientists would consider it unlikely, that genuine paranormal phenomena exist, that some aspect of consciousness or human experience persists after death in ways we don't yet understand. The honest answer to what's happening in room 441 from a scientific perspective is that we don't fully know. We have partial explanations that account for many reported experiences. We have frameworks for understanding how psychology, environment, and culture shape paranormal narratives. But we don't have a complete, unified explanation that accounts for all the data. The mystery persists, residing in that uncomfortable space where our current understanding runs out and speculation begins. As you drift further towards sleep, perhaps find comfort in the mystery itself. Not every question requires an immediate answer. Some puzzles can be held gently, examined from different angles, appreciated for their complexity rather than anxiously demanding resolution. Room 441 waits, patient and persistent, existing simultaneously as a physical space in a Chicago hotel and as a landscape of human experience, belief, and story. The mystery deepens, modern day. The Congress Plaza Hotel continues to operate in the present day, and room 441 remains part of its regular inventory. Modern guests still check into this room, some deliberately seeking it out for its reputation, others assigned there with no knowledge of its history. The phenomena continue to be reported, though the modern era brings new technologies and new context to the ancient question of whether the dead can linger among the living. Social media has transformed how hauntings are documented and shared. Where previous generations relied on word of mouth, written accounts, or occasional media coverage, today's guests can post their experiences instantly to platforms like Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. A search for Congress Plaza Hotel Room 441 reveals hundreds of posts from people describing their experiences, sharing photos and videos, and comparing notes with others who have stayed in the room. This democratization of paranormal documentation creates both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, we now have more data than ever before about what people experience in room 441. The volume of reports allows for statistical analysis, pattern recognition, and comparison across different time periods and guest demographics. On the other hand, the ease of sharing also means that marginal experiences get amplified, that people seeking attention might exaggerate or fabricate stories, and that the echo chamber effect of social media can create the appearance of consensus where genuine disagreement exists. One modern trend involves live streaming stays in room 441. Paranormal enthusiasts set up cameras and broadcast their entire night in the room, allowing viewers to watch for phenomena in real time. These live streams provide an interesting form of documentation, as they capture hours of unedited footage rather than selective clips. Viewers watching these streams report seeing anomalies, unexplained shadows or movements. Those skeptics note that hours of watching a static room in low-light conditions can make people see things that aren't there through a combination of boredom and image artifacts. A particularly popular YouTuber specializing in paranormal content spent 3 nights in room 441 in 2019, documenting the experience across several videos that collectively garnered millions of views. The YouTuber set up multiple cameras, EMF detectors, and audio recording equipment, creating a comprehensive monitoring system. Over the 3 nights, they captured several potentially anomalous events. A door opening with no visible cause, unexplained temperature drops, strange sounds on the audio recordings, and what appeared to be objects moving on their own. The most compelling moment from this investigation came on the 2nd night when the YouTuber, sitting alone in the room and addressing the camera, asked, "Johnny, if you're here, can you show yourself?" Within seconds, one of the room's cameras, positioned to record the closet area, appear to capture a shadowy figure moving across its field of view. The figure was indistinct, visible for perhaps 2 seconds, but the timing, immediately following the verbal request, was striking. The footage was analyzed extensively by both believers and skeptics, with predictably different conclusions, but it remains one of the more widely viewed pieces of potential evidence from Room 441. The hotel's management approach to Room 441 and its haunted reputation has evolved significantly in recent decades. Where once they downplayed or denied the stories, current management takes a more pragmatic approach. The room is available for booking through normal channels, and the hotel neither confirms nor denies the paranormal claims. However, staff are trained to handle questions about the room professionally, and during peak ghost tourism seasons, particularly around Halloween, Room 441 books solid months in advance. This evolution reflects broader changes in how the hospitality industry views allegedly haunted properties. Where once a haunted reputation was seen as purely negative, potentially scaring away guests, hotels now recognize that some guests actively seek out haunted rooms. Ghost tourism has become a legitimate market segment, with people planning vacations around paranormal experiences. The Congress Plaza Hotel, like many historic properties with haunted reputations, has learned to thread the needle between respecting skeptical guests and accommodating those seeking supernatural encounters. Staff perspectives on Room 441 provide valuable insights, as these are people who work in the hotel daily and have opportunities to observe the room over time without the emotional investment of guests seeking paranormal experiences. Current housekeeping staff, when willing to discuss the room, some prefer not to, generally acknowledge that 441 feels different from other rooms. The temperature seems to fluctuate more. Small items go missing and reappear. The room sometimes looks different from how they remember leaving it. One housekeeper who has worked at the hotel for over 15 years described her experience with Room 441 in an interview for a paranormal podcast. She doesn't use the word haunted, she says, but admits the room has a presence. She's learned to announce herself when entering, saying, "Good morning, Johnny. I'm here to clean," as a matter of routine. She claims that when she does this, the room feels more cooperative, things don't go missing as often, and she can complete her work without incident. When she forgets to announce herself, she often has problems, misplaced supplies, the vacuum cleaner malfunctioning, a general sense of resistance to her presence. Security personnel at the hotel have their own collection of Room 441 stories. Night security, making rounds through the floors during the early morning hours, report that the 11th floor often feels different from others. Several guards describe feeling watched when walking past Room 441, even when they know the room is empty. Occasionally, when an empty Room 441 triggers a maintenance alert, a door left open, a temperature sensor alert, a noise complaint from an adjacent room about sounds coming from 441 when it's unoccupied, security has to enter the room to investigate. These investigations typically find nothing wrong, but guards describe the experience as unsettling. The room feels occupied even when it's demonstrably empty. The air feels heavier. Some guards report that the hair on their arms stands up when they enter, a physiological response to stimuli they can't identify. One security officer described entering an empty Room 441 during a night shift and finding the bathroom sink running, the mirror fogged with steam, as if someone had just taken a shower. The room had been vacant for 2 days, and there was no malfunction in the plumbing that would explain it. The front desk staff fields regular inquiries about room 441 from potential guests. Some callers specifically request the room, sometimes booking months in advance to ensure they get it. Others ask about the room's reputation, wanting to be sure they're not assigned there. The hotel accommodates both types of requests. If you specifically want room 441 for its reputation, you can request it. If you want to avoid it, you can ask to be placed elsewhere. Interestingly, the hotel reports that room 441's rates are the same as other rooms on the same floor with similar configurations. They don't charge a premium for the paranormal reputation, nor do they discount it to compensate for potentially frightened guests. It's treated as a standard room that happens to have a legend attached to it. Modern technology has brought new dimensions to room 441 investigations. Thermal imaging cameras, far more sophisticated than earlier models, can detect subtle temperature variations with precision. Full-spectrum cameras can capture light across ultraviolet, visible, and infrared ranges, potentially revealing phenomena invisible to the naked eye. Digital voice recorders with noise reduction and enhancement capabilities can isolate sounds that might be missed by the human ear. Motion sensors can detect movement with great sensitivity. Several recent investigations have employed all of these technologies simultaneously, creating comprehensive monitoring systems. One such investigation, conducted by a university parapsychology research group in 2021, set up a network of sensors throughout room 441 and monitored it continuously for 2 weeks. The researchers stayed in the room, but also collected data during periods when the room was empty. The results, published in a parapsychology journal, were nuanced. The researchers documented several anomalies that couldn't be easily explained. Temperature variations that didn't correlate with HVAC cycles or outside weather conditions, EMF fluctuations that appeared random and weren't linked to electrical system activity, and several instances of what appeared to be movement detected by motion sensors when the room was supposedly empty. However, the researchers acknowledged that they couldn't definitively rule out mundane explanations for these anomalies, from building settling to electronic interference to equipment malfunction. What made their study notable was its rigorous methodology and its honest acknowledgement of limitations. Rather than claiming definitive proof of paranormal activity or definitively debunking the legends, the researchers concluded that room 441 showed patterns of anomalous data that warranted further study but didn't yet prove anything supernatural. This measured approach represents the best of modern paranormal research, applying scientific rigor to questions that resist easy resolution. The COVID-19 pandemic brought an unusual period in room 441's history. Like hotels worldwide, the Congress Plaza Hotel experienced dramatically reduced occupancy during 2020 and 2021. Room 441, along with most of the hotel's rooms, sat empty for long periods. This extended vacancy created an accidental experiment. If room 441's phenomena are triggered or influenced by human presence, do they continue during months of emptiness? According to staff who continued working during this period, the answer appears to be yes. Housekeepers entering the long vacant room for periodic maintenance reported the same sense of presence they'd always felt. Security guards making rounds through empty floors still found room 441 distinctive. One maintenance worker described entering the room to check on plumbing after it had been empty for 6 weeks and finding it inexplicably cold. The thermostat showing a normal temperature but the actual air temperature noticeably colder than the hallway or adjacent rooms. The pandemic period also saw a surge in online interest in haunted locations as people confined to their homes sought escapism and entertainment. Virtual ghost tours became popular, and the Congress Plaza Hotel participated in several of these, including one that featured a live stream from room 441. Viewers from around the world watched a static image of the empty room for several hours, and while nothing dramatically paranormal occurred, numerous viewers reported seeing shadows moving or hearing strange sounds through the stream, though these perceptions might have been as much about viewers' expectations as about actual phenomena. As normalcy returned and the hotel reopened to full capacity, room 441 resumed its place in the regular room inventory. The first guest to stay there post-pandemic reported experiences consistent with the room's history. The now familiar step-thump sounds, the sense of not being alone, doors opening, electronics behaving strangely. The hiatus, if anything, seemed not to have diminished whatever makes room 441 distinctive. Current guests booking room 441 come from diverse backgrounds with varying motivations. Some are hardcore paranormal investigators with rooms full of equipment, approaching the stay as research. Others are casual ghost enthusiasts seeking a thrill. Some are skeptics deliberately testing themselves against what they assume is mere legend. And occasionally, room 441 is assigned to someone who has no idea of its reputation and experiences something that challenges their worldview. One recent account from 2023 describes such a guest, a businessman attending a conference at the hotel. He checked in late, tired from travel, and was given room 441 simply because it was available. He had never heard of the room's reputation. That night, he was awakened around 3 a.m. by the sound of someone knocking on his door. He checked the peephole, saw no one, and assumed he'd imagined it. But the knocking resumed, 3 distinct raps, then silence, then 3 more raps. Annoyed and thinking a drunk guest was playing pranks, he opened the door. The hallway was empty and completely silent. He closed the door and returned to bed, but now he couldn't sleep. He became aware of sounds in the room itself. Creaks, rustles, what sounded like breathing that wasn't his own. The room felt different than it had when he'd gone to bed, charged with some energy he couldn't name. In the morning, exhausted and unsettled, he mentioned his strange night to a colleague at breakfast. The colleague pulled out his phone, Googled Congress Plaza Hotel room 441, and showed him the results. The businessman's expression, the colleague later recounted, transformed from confusion to comprehension to genuine fear as he realized he'd accidentally spent the night in one of America's most famous haunted rooms. He moved to a different room for the remainder of his stay. Stories like this, from guests with no prior knowledge or expectation, are particularly valuable for researchers. They reduce the influence of suggestion and confirmation bias, offering something closer to a blind test of the room's properties. The fact that some unknowing guests report experiences consistent with a room's legend while others notice nothing unusual suggests that if genuine phenomena occur in room 441, they're inconsistent and unpredictable, affecting some people but not others, active at some times but not always. The mystery of room 441 persists into the present day, undiminished by time, investigation, or skepticism. The room continues to generate stories, to affect people, to resist simple explanation. Whether you interpret these effects as paranormal, psychological, environmental, or some complex combination, Room 441 remains a unique space, a room where thousands of people have experienced something unusual enough to remember, remarkable enough to share, mysterious enough to wonder about long after they've checked out and returned home. Tales from staff and long-term witnesses. The most valuable perspectives on room 441 often come not from overnight guests or paranormal investigators passing through, but from the hotel staff who work at the Congress Plaza day after day, year after year. These are people who have observed the room across different seasons, different occupants, different circumstances. Their accumulated experiences, while often less dramatic than guest accounts, provide continuity and context that help distinguish patterns from random occurrences. Victoria, a front desk supervisor who worked at the Congress Plaza Hotel for 23 years before retiring in 2018, provided one of the most detailed staff accounts in an interview preserved by a local historical society. She began working at the hotel in 1995 and quickly learned about room 441's reputation from other staff members. Initially skeptical, dismissing it as superstition or employee storytelling, her perspective shifted over years of accumulated experiences. Victoria's account describes patterns she observed in room 441 that distinguished it from other rooms. Guest complaints or concerns came from 441 more frequently than statistical averages would predict. These weren't always paranormal claims. Sometimes guests simply requested a room change without giving specific reasons, or mentioned they hadn't slept well, or described the room as uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite articulate. The frequency of these requests, Victoria said, was noticeably higher for 441 than for comparable rooms. She also noted patterns in who experienced phenomena versus who didn't. In her observation, people who were stressed, emotionally volatile, or in transitional life periods seemed more likely to report unusual experiences in room 441. Calm, centered people more often had uneventful stays. She didn't know whether this suggested that emotional states made people more susceptible to paranormal experiences, more likely to misinterpret normal occurrences, or more sensitive to environmental factors that others didn't notice. One pattern Victoria emphasized was the elevator behavior associated with room 441. The elevators servicing the 11th floor showed a demonstrable tendency to stop there without being called, particularly during night hours when guest traffic was minimal. This happened often enough that engineering investigated the elevator system multiple times, suspecting malfunction. They never found anything wrong with the mechanics or electronics. Yet the elevators continued their unexplained stops at the 11th floor, sometimes multiple times per night. Thomas, a maintenance engineer who worked at the hotel from 2001 to 2017, provided insights into room 441's physical and mechanical peculiarities. His job involved responding to maintenance issues throughout the hotel, and he entered room 441 countless times to address various problems. In his experience, the room had more maintenance issues than average, despite being structurally and mechanically no different from surrounding rooms. The room's thermostat was particularly problematic, Thomas reported. Guests frequently called to report the room being too cold, but when he checked the thermostat and heating system, everything functioned normally. The thermostat would show that the room should be a comfortable 72 degrees, but guests insisted it felt much colder. On several occasions, Thomas brought a separate thermometer to verify the actual temperature, and it would confirm the thermostat's reading, yet the room would still feel noticeably cold to him. Electrical issues plagued room 441 more than other rooms, according to Thomas. Light bulbs burned out faster, requiring more frequent replacement. Lamps would flicker or fail to turn on despite having fresh bulbs and proper wiring. The television would malfunction in ways that couldn't be replicated when removed from the room and tested in the workshop. Replace the TV, and the new one would develop similar problems within weeks. Thomas described one particularly frustrating period when the door lock to room 441 malfunctioned repeatedly over several weeks. Guests would find themselves locked out despite having proper key cards. The lock would refuse to recognize valid cards, but would occasionally work with cards that should have been deactivated. The hotel replaced the lock mechanism 3 times before it finally started functioning reliably. Yet engineering could never identify what was wrong with the previous locks when they tested them after removal. What struck Thomas most about working in room 441 was the atmosphere. As a practical, technically minded person, he didn't believe in ghosts when he started working at the hotel. But after years of entering that particular room, usually alone, often late at night, he developed what he described as a healthy respect for whatever made the room different. He never saw anything he couldn't explain, never heard voices or footsteps, but the feeling of being watched was persistent and undeniable. He learned to announce himself when entering, following the same protocol as the housekeeping staff, and claimed it made the work go smoother. Maria, head of housekeeping for the 11th floor from 2010 to 2020, supervised the cleaning staff who serviced room 441 most frequently. In her tenure, she heard every variety of strange story from her team. Items moving, cold spots, shadows, sounds, feelings of unease. Maria's approach was practical. The room had to be cleaned regardless of its reputation, so her staff needed strategies to work efficiently despite the unsettling atmosphere. She established a protocol where newer housekeepers worked room 441 in pairs until they felt comfortable handling alone. This reduced anxiety and provided mutual support if something unusual occurred. Maria also implemented a practice where the room was always cleaned during daylight hours when possible, as staff reported feeling more comfortable working there in natural light than after dark. Maria's own experiences in room 441 were subtle but consistent. She noticed that her watch, which kept perfect time elsewhere in the hotel, would run slow when she spent time in 441. Not dramatically, just a few minutes lost over the course of an hour's cleaning. She tested this multiple times with different watches, always with similar results, yet could never determine a cause. The room had no unusual electromagnetic fields that her maintenance colleagues could detect, yet somehow time seemed to move differently there. She also reported a phenomenon other staff had mentioned: the room's resistance to certain changes. If the housekeeping staff arranged the room a particular way, with specific placement of furniture or decorations, the room seemed to accept it. But if they tried to change the arrangement significantly, problems would ensue. Furniture that should have been easy to move became difficult. Items would fall. Staff would feel increasingly uncomfortable until they returned things to familiar configurations. Robert, a night auditor who worked the overnight shift at the front desk for 12 years, had a unique perspective on room 441. His shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the quietest hours in the hotel when most guests slept. He fielded calls from room 441 with notable frequency during these hours, far more than from other rooms. Some calls were maintenance issues, the heat not working, strange noises, doors not locking properly. Others were more ambiguous. Guests asking if anyone else was on the floor, reporting sounds from the hallway or adjacent rooms. Sometimes just wanted to talk to another person because they felt uneasy. Robert developed a sixth sense for which calls from room 441 were genuinely problematic versus which were guests frightening themselves with the room's reputation. The most interesting calls from Robert's perspective came from guests who didn't know about room 441's history. These callers would describe experiences, often trying to rationalize what they'd heard or felt, clearly troubled but not wanting to sound foolish. Robert would listen patiently, sometimes offer to send security to check on things, sometimes suggest practical solutions like adjusting the thermostat or checking that windows were closed. Only if guests specifically asked about the room's history would he acknowledge its reputation. He described one call that stayed with him from a guest who had no knowledge of the room's haunted status. The caller, a woman traveling alone for business, called around 2 a.m. to report that someone was in her room. Robert, alarmed, prepared to send security immediately and asked her to describe what was happening. The woman said she could hear someone breathing, could sense a presence, but couldn't see anyone. The room's lights were on. She'd checked the bathroom and closet, and the door was locked from the inside with the security latch engaged. Robert did send security to check on her, but he suspected what they would find: an empty hallway, no signs of intrusion, a locked room with only the guest inside. The security report confirmed this, yet the woman remained convinced someone had been in the room with her. She checked out that same night, despite it being the middle of the night, and refused to return to the room even to collect her belongings, which staff later packed and brought to her. These staff perspectives paint a picture of room 441 as a genuinely anomalous space within the hotel's geography. Not every staff member who works there experiences anything unusual. Some serve entire careers at the hotel, maintaining skepticism about the room's reputation. But enough staff members, across different roles and different time periods, report consistent patterns of strangeness that it's difficult to dismiss the room as simply the subject of urban legend and suggestion. The long-term perspectives also reveal something about how hauntings, if hauntings they are, function in the real world. They're not constant or predictable. Room 441 doesn't perform on command. Sometimes it's quiet for weeks or months, just another hotel room where guests sleep undisturbed and housekeeping faces no unusual challenges. Then, without apparent trigger or pattern, the phenomena intensify. Multiple reports in quick succession, staff experiencing pronounced unease, electronic malfunctions, temperature anomalies. Staff who have worked at the hotel for decades describe these cycles without fully understanding them. Perhaps the phenomena relate to external factors not yet identified, environmental conditions, or electromagnetic events that create windows when unusual things are more likely to occur. Perhaps human presence and emotion play roles. The collective energy of hotel guests and staff somehow feeding or suppressing whatever makes room 441 different. Or perhaps the activity is genuinely random, subject to no pattern we can discern, occurring according to rules that exist beyond our current understanding. What's clear from these staff accounts is that room 441's mystery isn't merely a product of overnight guest experiences. The people who work in the hotel, who have observed this room across years and decades, who have no financial or personal incentive to perpetuate ghost stories, nevertheless acknowledge that room 441 is different. Their accumulated witness, practical and undramatic as it often is, provides some of the most compelling evidence that something unusual occurs in this particular space. As you near sleep's edge, perhaps consider these witnesses, these ordinary people doing ordinary jobs in an extraordinary room. They clock in, perform their duties, clock out, day after day, year after year. And throughout their tenures, Room 441 remains a puzzle, a question mark in the middle of their familiar workplace, a reminder that the world contains mysteries that persist despite our best efforts to explain or eliminate them. And so we arrive at the end of our journey through the Congress Plaza Hotel and the enduring mystery of Room 441. We've explored the hotel's magnificent history, traced the legend of Peg Leg Johnny, examined decades of guest encounters, investigated the building's other hauntings, considered scientific and psychological explanations, and listened to the accumulated wisdom of staff members who have spent careers working alongside this enigmatic room. What have we learned? Perhaps the most honest answer is that we've learned how much remains unknown. Room 441 persists as a mystery despite over a century of stories, despite decades of investigation, despite our modern tools and technologies. The room refuses to yield simple answers, existing in that liminal space between the explainable and the inexplicable, the natural and the supernatural, the dead and the living. Whether Peg Leg Johnny truly walks the 11th floor of the Congress Plaza Hotel, whether his spirit remains tethered to the room where he died, whether the phenomena reported there represent genuine paranormal activity or fascinating expressions of psychology, environment, and culture, these questions remain open. And perhaps that openness, that unresolved mystery, is precisely what makes Room 441 so compelling. In our modern world, where Google can answer almost any factual question in seconds, where satellite imagery reveals the entire surface of the planet, where we carry the sum of human knowledge in our pockets, it's almost comforting to encounter a mystery that resists such easy resolution. Room 441 reminds us that wonder still exists, that the universe contains questions we haven't yet answered, that our understanding of reality might be less complete than we assume. As you drift into sleep, let these stories settle in your mind like dust motes in afternoon light. The grand ballrooms echoing with phantom music, the basement corridors where shadows move independently, the elevators stopping at floors where no one waits. And at the center of it all, Room 441, patient and persistent, never truly empty, never entirely alone. Perhaps tonight, as you dream, you'll walk those hallways yourself, feel the plush carpet beneath your feet, hear the distant sounds of a hotel settling into nighttime quiet. Perhaps you'll find yourself standing before that ordinary door with its brass number plate, key in hand, wondering whether to turn the lock and step inside. And perhaps, in that dream space where normal rules blur and anything becomes possible, you'll discover your own answer to the question that has puzzled so many. Is Room 441 haunted? Before we part, I want to thank you for joining us here at Mystic Sleep Tales. Your presence, your curiosity, your willingness to explore these mysteries alongside us makes this channel possible and meaningful. We create these stories not just to help you sleep, though we hope they serve that purpose, but to remind you that the world remains full of wonder, that mystery persists, that some questions are worth pondering even when answers elude us. If you've enjoyed this journey through the Congress Plaza Hotel and the legend of Room 441, I'd be grateful if you would subscribe to our channel. Each subscription helps us continue creating these deep explorations of history's mysteries. These long-form narratives designed to carry you gently into sleep while engaging your imagination and curiosity. I'm also genuinely curious about where you are in the world and what time it is as you listen to this. Please leave a comment letting me know your location and the hour. Are you in Chicago, perhaps where the Congress Plaza Hotel stands against the night sky? Are you across the ocean in Europe or Asia, beginning your day with these American ghost stories? Are you in the middle of the night, using this tale to help you return to sleep? I read every comment, and I find it fascinating to imagine all of you scattered across the globe, connected by these shared stories of the mysterious and unexplained. Finally, if there are specific topics you'd like us to address in future episodes, please share your suggestions. Do you have local legends from your region that deserve in-depth investigation? Are there historical mysteries that have captured your imagination? Are there any unexplained events you'd like us to explore? Your input shapes what we create, and I'm always eager to hear which stories resonate with you, which mysteries pique your curiosity. The Congress Plaza Hotel on Michigan Avenue in Chicago still stands, its limestone facade weathered but dignified, its corridors still echoing with the footsteps of both the living and perhaps the dead. Room 441, on the 11th floor, is still available for reservation if you're brave enough or curious enough. The door still opens, revealing a space that seems perfectly normal but has affected countless people in ways they struggle to explain. And somewhere in that room, or in the stories we tell about him, or in the collective memory of everyone who stayed there, wondered about him, or was disturbed by him, Peg-Leg Johnny lives on. A man who was almost unnoticed in life, became unforgettable after his death. Its distinctive footsteps echoed for decades, its presence felt by maids and security guards, skeptical businessmen and eager paranormal investigators, ghost believers and those who absolutely do not. Ultimately, perhaps the truth about room 441 is less important than what the room represents. A space where the ordinary becomes extraordinary. The explainable confronts the inexplicable, where we face the limits of our understanding and the continuity of mystery. A room that reminds us as we drift off to sleep that the world is often stranger and more wonderful than we remember, that history leaves traces that we can feel even when we cannot fully see them, and that some questions are worth contemplating rather than rushing to answer. Sleep well, dear listeners. May your dreams be peaceful, your rest restful, and your sense of wonder undisturbed when you wake. The Congress Plaza Hotel will still be there, room 441 patiently waiting on its 11th floor, keeping its secrets, guarding its mysteries, never completely empty, never fully explained. And we'll be here, ready for more stories, more mysteries, more journeys to strange and beautiful places where history, mystery, and imagination meet. Until next time, this Mystic Sleep Tales wishes you good night, sweet dreams, and a deep, restful sleep filled with the gentle mysteries of the unknown. Remember, tomorrow is the first day of the rest of your life. Sweet dreams.